You want to wait?
All right, so today we're talking about creating a budget, tripods and monopods, and proxies. With creating a budget, we're actually going to make an exercise out of this. I'll be emailing that out tomorrow with the details of what we're going to do. Basically, we're going to take that scene that we used a few semesters back when we were creating the storyboard for that kitchen scene that I made. So it's just going to be one location, just a scene, just so we can sort of see how we would use it, how we would budget it out, and what we'd look for. So we've already kind of broken that down. If people still have that older exercise, they can use the information from that. But otherwise, you'll have to re-break it down again to find the budget. So when you're creating a budget, there's really going to be two main phases that you go through. The first is going to be the preliminary budget, which is going to be the one you use to try to gain financing for the project. And it's called a top sheet, which is basically just like a summarized version of how much everything is going to cost, an estimated cost. And this is not just a guess. This is based on whoever's making the budget, whether it's the producer or the executive producer might be the ones making the preliminary budget. And if you have a larger set with more people, the line producer or the unit production manager are going to make it the line by line budget that's more detailed and filled out. And then they're going to be the ones that are focused on that, figuring out how to switch people's budgets around whenever it's needed and all of that kind of stuff. So if you have a budget like that, if you're on a smaller budgeted production, then you might be the one doing the budget. And you just need to be sure that you're actually looking into all these things and figuring out what these things might cost so that you're not giving a false amount whenever you're trying to get financed. Whenever you're trying to find financing or get a grant or something like that, you want to show as quickly as possible a detailed, rough estimate of as accurate as you can get it without knowing the actual numbers is pretty much what you're trying to do in this first thing. So it's called a top sheet. And I actually downloaded one from Studio Binder that we'll look at just a little bit. It's kind of how it's all broken down on most budgets is it's broken down by above the line, production expenses below the line, post-production below the line, and other below the line. And we'll talk about what's in that in each. And then we'll just kind of look into when you go a little deeper into it and it's how it's like breaking apart into subcategories and you start seeing all the different expenses and things like that. So basically the first thing, I'm gonna go back to basically the first thing that you're going to do when you're creating a budget, you need to have your schedule ready, your production schedule, or you at least have to have an idea of it, because how many days you're going to be shooting is going to vastly determine how much the things are going to cost, because every day you add on is going to be more budget to your crew and your cast per day. Is also going to be more for the food budget and rentals and insurance and all of that stuff and locations. So you really need to like figure out your schedule before you start working on a budget and know how many days you're likely going to be shooting. And then you work your budget based on that. When you're trying to find funding, you do this top sheet. And that's what you'll show to investors and things like that. You're not going to show them the line by line detailed version unless you already have it available, which you most likely won't at that stage. Top sheet is just basically an overview of the costs for the production. So you can think of it kind of like a general budget. If you were going to say that you had a budget of $200 for groceries, that's your top sheet. You say groceries, $200 every 2 weeks or something like that. Well, that would be your top sheet, basically. And then the detailed breakdown, the second phase of the budget, when you go in and you do a line by line item, that's kind of like the receipt. It's a line by line accounting of each individual cost and why. And so then you could think of it like a receipt having like, $5 for milk, $3 for bread, line by line item of why it costs $200 for groceries. So top sheet, just the general overview. Detailed budget breaks down why it costs that much or why it estimatedly costs that much when you break it down. Again, when making a top sheet, there's those four main categories: above the line, below the line production, below the line post, and below the line other, which usually includes stuff like insurance, distribution, and marketing. When you make a budget, you're going to have your estimated costs. And then when you actually start getting your real costs, like how much things actually are going to be, it's going to start having your adjusted budget factor in to the actual cost for line by line item. You might have a good sense of how much a camera operator will be. Do your research and you figure out around the area that you're going to shoot and the month that you're going to shoot, which might be an on or off season. So there's more competitive rates going on or less competitive rates. And the area you're in and the experience level you require. Those things are going to determine how much it's likely to cost per day or per week for your crew member. So if you're going to say that you have a, let's say, camera operator, and you've called around, you've gotten some rates from some people of how much it might cost. So you have a general idea, and it's between like $300 and $600, let's say. I know it's probably vastly different depending on where you are. But let's say it's $300 to $600 a day for the person. For the majority of the people, they fell within that range. And so for the preliminary budget, you choose between the $300 and $600. You say it's about $450 or $500 for that person per day. Then when you actually get somebody, so that would go into your top sheet, the $500 per day for camera person. That would be part of the budget that you determine what the top sheet will be and why the camera department as a whole needs so-and-so amount of money, and you're factoring in because the camera operator, because the director of photography, because of the camera assistant, first and second assistant, all those things you're factoring in, and then you're figuring out the total cost for your top sheet. But when you go individually into it, you take out your estimates as you're actually getting someone. Let's say you got somebody and it's actually $25 cheaper than you thought. You got them for $475 instead of for $500. Well, you can factor that into your budget, and now you're a tiny bit under budget from what you estimated earlier. And that's good, but it could also go the opposite. You could be $25 more expensive than you estimated for. So you might say it's $525. And that's why some people will actually budget into their estimated budget the highest rate that they've heard. So if there was a range between $300 and $500, $300 and $600, I mean, they might say that the camera operator is going to cost $600 per day. That way,
feel like it's harder to sorry, honey, I didn't mean to cut you off. I think it's smarter for you to think about it in the highest price, just because that way there's no surprises if it needs to get higher, and if you can find a medium to lower price, it just feels like you're saving money, even if it's still technically an average. It still gives you that nice feeling of, I saved a little on this, and that can go towards something else in the budget, and you can put that towards maybe emergency savings or something else in the budget that might be needed later.
Yeah. And so a lot of people will say it's a good idea to budget for the worst case scenario. And that way, if you are trying to get funding for it and you're saying, hey, I need $2 million for my film, and then you hear somebody say you talk to some people who are you're shopping it around, trying to get it made, and they say, no, you can only do it for 1,500,000. Well, now that you had the worst case scenarios built into your budget, you might be able to find people for those in-between rates and get it down, and find those in-between rates for everything else, like locations and whatever else that you put into the budget in the first place. And that way you might be able to bring it down to or below that $1,500,000 mark, instead of the opposite, where you like thought maybe it might be 500 per day for this person and now it's 525. Well, now you have to find that extra money from somewhere else in the budget, while also trying to bring it down. If you said you needed 2 million, but really you need 2,500,000, and they're only going to offer 1,500,000, that's a huge difference. So that's what they always say, like, it's better to overestimate the budget, preliminary budget, and then to lower it later than it is to, because it's easier to take stuff out than it is to try to get more money and putting stuff in. And like, oh, I thought I needed 2 million, but I really need 200 million. I mean, 2,250,000. Then that's a little more of like.
It's easier to ask for more and then need less.
Yeah, right. It's easier to ask for more and need less, especially because if they don't give you that full amount, you'll have more room to be able to like lessen the budget.
Definitely. And I would say like try to like accept all the budget and come under budget.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes any sense. So like if you get 2 million, take the 2 million, spend what you need. And then if you have extra at the end, you could just, be like, look, we didn't even spend all the budget. Win. Yeah.
Definitely. And you always want to have some extra anyway, if you can, so that you can, stuff's going to go wrong. No matter what kind of shoot you're doing, stuff's going to go wrong. And you always want to have that little bit of extra buffer room so that you're not like surprised by it and like taken aback and like, oh my God. And then you're struggling and rushing to try to find some funding before you shut down all of production. So it's easier to have that buffer room and have a contingency plan in place so that if something goes wrong, you're like, oh, well, we'll just take it out of that other part of the budget that we have that's extra. So yeah, when you're making your budget, you're going to estimate it. And then when you're doing your actual costs, whether you're doing it or your line producer or your unit production manager, if you have one, they'll be doing this if you have one on your set. If not, you'll have to find somebody, or you'll have to do this to actually keep up with the actual costs of the budget. So you don't want to just make a budget and then leave it and say, yeah, I have 2 million for this, and not pay attention to that ever again, because you need to make sure that whatever you're actually spending is either matching the budget or under budget. So, or even if it's over budget, you have to know that so that you don't run into the problem later without even having known. You want to come into those problems early on so you can figure out if you are over budget in, let's say, the camera department, then you have to be like, okay, can I take money away from the locations department? Can I take money away from the lighting, like from the grip department? Like where can I take away some of this budget so that I can give it to the camera department that really needs it because they're going over budget? So yeah, you always want to, it's a constantly changing thing whenever you're actually making the budget, especially when you get like before you hire your crew. If you don't have any crew and you're making a budget, then you're guessing what those rates will be. And then when you get those actual rates from each person, you might have gotten a better or worse rate than you estimated. And you really want to keep track of that so you can know where your budget stands overall and where your actual budget is compared to your estimated.
Sense. Yep.
When you're starting to figure out the budget, you have to do that script breakdown, figure out all the elements, the characters, how many characters there are, if there's any background cast needed and how many, what kind of locations and how many locations are needed, and all of that stuff that we've talked about before in the script breakdown. You got to find all those elements, and then make that shooting schedule to figure out how many days it's going to need to be shot. So you can factor in all those costs for cast, crew, gear, insurance, and everything into your top sheet to get a general overview that's relatively accurate to what it's actually going to be. You want to start with what's called hard costs. And that's the cost that you know that you're going to need to spend and that don't vary. So the variable costs are like labor and hours. And those are things that might vary based on if the production is running behind or how much per day those people require. If the production is running behind on a specific day, then you got to factor in overtime and things like that. So those costs are a little bit variable and they can change based on those factors. The hard costs are the ones that if you know you need a table and you know you need it to be this certain kind of wood, whatever else, and you're going to buy it off of Amazon or you're going to buy it from IKEA or whatever other furniture website, then you can look at those prices and get like a very close estimate of how much you're going to spend based on the prices that you see in the market. So it's kind of the same thing. You want to just shop around and figure out, do your research, see how much the thing actually is going to cost. But it is usually easier to start with those hard costs since they are fixed and you can see the price. You can go and see how much is this equipment if I'm going to buy it straight out. If you're renting equipment, then that would fall under the variable rate because you might need it for more or less days than you're thinking. So that would be variable. But if you're talking about hard spending, you might say, oh, well, I know that we're going to need, 8 CTO gels because of this shot or this scene. And each CTO gel costs about, I don't know, say $8 or something. And then you factor in how much is 8 times 8, $64 total just for that. And that would be something you figure out for your budget. Those are called purchases or expendables. The purchases being something that you might be able to resell. If you do buy furniture and it doesn't get destroyed, you might be able to resell that after the production's done. Expendables is things that's never, like, it's going to be used and then it's going to be not usable anymore after the fact, which might be like some window scrim or something to block out the light. Once that stuff's used, it's pretty much not usable anymore for the most part. And so then you just say you take that out of the costs and you're not going to get it back. So that's something else. But yeah, generally you have those two categories. You have purchases and expendables, and then you have rentals and labor. And that's going to be based on hours or days worked. All right, so lastly, if you look at this budget, you can see it broken down into these categories we already talked about. That first part, story and rights, producers, director, cast, traveling and living, and fringes. Fringes being like, if you have union production crew and cast, then it is going to cost you extra because you have to pay for stuff like healthcare, state taxes, and stuff like that. And those are called fringe benefits. And so you typically, if you have a union crew member or a union cast, then they will have their own rules based on which union they're attached to. They will have a percentage of what the fringes will be. So you don't really have to like figure that out, but you do have to add it into your budget if you're hiring people like that. And then you put that in there, and that would all go to the above the line department. And then you can see this is the top sheet. So that's just saying like the producers, the director, the cast, travel of living, they cost this much. There's this many of them. And so that's the total above the line. And above the line is just anybody who has creative, who can input creative, who can creatively change the story. So the person who has the story rights, or the person who wrote it, the script writer, or the producers who can vastly change what can be done inside of the the production itself, they can guide the director and say, well, we need it to connect to this other film, or we need to reference this, or we need to input this merchandise in here, or we need to put this logo in here somewhere. And that's going to change some of the creative choices that are in the film itself. And he, of course, the director who's over the rest of it, who is free to choose what he wants as long as it doesn't go against the producers or the studio's requests and requirements. You have the cast, and that's just like big name cast that will draw in an audience. So it's people who people recognize and people like, and maybe say like, oh, I like Johnny Depp, I'll go see this movie because Johnny Depp's in it. Well, he's going to go on the above the line because he's going to draw in that. So he's not really so the cast part, it's more of like above the line because they're going to be drawing in people to that production, to that movie or that film. It's not, they don't really have as much of a creative input, but they do have creative input into their character and things like that. So there's that. But then they go down to below the line production, which is just pretty much everybody, like that's the bulk of all of your items and all of your departments and everything that's going to be on the production set or making these sets. If you're creating sets, if you're building them, all of those things are going to go into it. Production staff, extra talent, background talent, side characters that maybe have a line or two or three or something like that. Set locations, set design, set operations, special effects, set dressing, property, costumes, vehicles, animals, makeup and hair, set lighting, camera, production sound, transportation, location expenses, second unit, if you have one, and tests. So there's like all that stuff that's going to happen on the production itself, on set, during principles of photography. Mm-hmm. And so that's going to be the bulk of everything because that's what you're building towards and then when you start shooting it, you're going to have that certain amount of days, which is going to vastly affect how much this part of the budget costs, this section. After that, you have the next section, which is the below the line post-production. You can see it's visual effects, editing, the music, post-production sound, and then just like any of the tests and the viewings and the people you need to bring back, coloring, things like that will go in there too. And then lastly, you have the below the line other, which is just publicity, insurance, any general expenses that you didn't account for in the rest of the parts of the budget. Any fees or charges. If you're doing a what's it called? Film festival run at the end, then that would be something you put here. The distribution costs, if you're not a studio, if you're independent and you're trying to get one, then that's where you would put this. And marketing, if you're going to be self-marketing or publicity, I guess would go with marketing. And then you would also put right after that the contingency plan. And the contingency plan is a separate part of the budget that is added on to all the rest. So if you say the whole production itself might cost $2 million, a lot of people will say the contingency plan needs to be between like 6% to up to 15%. And that's just an added cost that you put in for that buffer room so that if anything goes wrong, if you did have a $2 million budget and you had a 10% contingency plan, then you put into the budget that you would need an extra $200,000. So you'd say you need $2,200,000. Even though your estimates and doing all your research, you came to $2 million in above the line, below the line production, below the line post-production, and below the line other, your contingency plan is there so that if anything goes wrong, if you're set back a day, if maybe you get to the location and it starts raining on that day, and so now you have to figure out where to house everybody, all that other stuff that could come up, or maybe equipment breaks, that's where you would start taking out of your contingency plan funds if you don't have any other way of getting that money. And that's why it's always good to have that contingency plan, because things go wrong. So putting it in the budget before you even start will leave you some buffer room. So if anything does go wrong, you have a backup plan and you go, okay, well, didn't want to touch the contingency plan. I can take it out of post-production right now. You know, I overestimated for post-production, so I'm not going to touch the contingency plan. I'm going to take it away from post-production. And then when you get to post-production, maybe stuff goes wrong again. And then now you might need to start taking out of the contingency plan. But you always try to leave the contingency plan funding alone as much as you can. And you try to keep it for the entire thing, or not even use it at all if you can help it. Try to figure out how to get it out of the rest of the budget. But if you really need it, that's what you put it there for. It's just like a emergency fund or a savings account, pretty much, for your project. So just be sure when you're making your preliminary budget, first of all, you want to do your research and figure out what the actual costs are going to be around the area. If you don't have any of your crew yet, you want to ask around the area you plan to film in for the rates to get a good estimate of what it might cost. Don't just guess from last film you made. Don't guess from around your area. Things are different prices everywhere, and different times of year again. There's more competitive times where a lot of like pilot season starts or a lot of films are being made, usually more in like the summer, springtime when weather's a little bit better and nicer to be outside compared to winter, which might be a little slower and have less competitive rates. So depending on the time of year you're making your film or your project, you want to factor that in. So you don't just want to guess. And also these things are always changing. So something that you did 2 years ago, but the rates might have gone up a little bit, or they might have gone up a lot, just depending on what's happening and just how the rates are going and what the union's doing and things like that. So always shop around and ask people who are actually working in the industry. Even if you don't plan to actually use them, you can still get a good idea of how much that person in that position is going to cost. Also do your research for all of the items, the props, the locations you're going to need, as well as background actors and how many you'll need and how much they might cost. And if you need any housing, look at where you're going to shoot, look at different hotels around that area and things like that, and figure out the actual closest cost you can get to the real price. Again, you just want to make sure you're trying to be as accurate as possible without knowing the actual cost yet. So it's kind of like going online to, let's go back to the budget with a grocery budget. If I was going to go online to a grocery store website and look at all the items that I'm going to need, I can make a budget and then factor in, maybe put a little extra, like 6 or 7% or something in for taxes. And then I have a pretty close guess of how much it's going to cost to go there and actually buy all those items. But by the time I get there, maybe they went up 5%, whatever, like inflation took off. And so now it's more money. Or maybe I was looking at it online, which is the general area, but I was looking at it for my area. And I was planning to buy it when I went to New York. Well, New York's price is going to be vastly different. So first of all, you should always look at, the location that you're going to be in. So that's the same thing with grocery shopping. You don't want to look at something that is in Virginia if you're going to go to DC, or if you're going to go to New York to buy the things, because it's going to cost more in those areas.
I would also point out that like one thing that they were talking about is like, for some people it's a no-brainer. Yeah, you don't go off the same budget, but for some people they might think, oh, well, we're using a lot of the same materials, right? We're using a cinematographer, a director, we're using the same equipment. It's not the same, because at the end of the day, a lot of the scenes that you shoot are going to be different. So how long you're going to need certain things for, you might need more things that the other one didn't. And one main thing that they kept touching on is if you try to recycle your last budget, things will fall through the cracks and you'll end up forgetting to put stuff in. And that can be really dangerous as well, because then you could go over budget because crap, I didn't think of this, because you didn't have the time to sit down and create a brand new budget for this and go through everything you might need. So at the end of the day, you end up losing and you end up taking a much bigger risk. So that's also another huge thing to consider.
Yeah, if you made a budget before, you always want to just start from scratch. I mean, you can use the same template, or use the same
rates, for
general
example,
format.
Like something
You
depending
want to
on
use the same general format, but you don't want to keep every single item. Every budget for every film is going to be different, because based on what the film needs. Some films need stuntmen and stunt coordinators. Some other films don't. So you might have a line that shows what the stunt department needs. And in your current project, you don't need any stunts done. So you're not going to need that line item at all. And so you don't want to just start from an old budget because of that, because you might leave things in that don't need to be there, or you might not take out the amounts that you had in your previous budget. Or like Priscilla said, like if you have a camera person that you used in your last thing and they cost so and so many dollars, then you don't just want to leave that in for your next budget, because they're always changing. The rates are changing. And if you're going to other places, it's going to be different.
You might need them for different days, different times of days, different states. Even with TV shows, like there was an example that they made where it's like, you can't, even when you're budgeting for a series, you can't divide the budget by episode, because some episodes you're going to need more money than others, because they're going to have different things in them. Mm-hmm. So even stuff like that, even the smallest details can add or subtract to your budget, and you might not think of it until you're actually doing it.
Yeah. So, so yeah, be sure to do your research and to start from scratch, pretty much. You don't have to format the whole thing from scratch, but don't start with any numbers already input, and be sure to check every single line and every item, because you might be able to take stuff out, or you might have to add stuff in. If you didn't have that stunt department line in your budget, you're going to need to add that in if you do need it in your next project. So you want to just be sure to keep track of everything that's needed. And that's why you do that script breakdown, and you figure out all of the exact things you need, and you really think about it. And then you go in and you do your research to figure out what the closest you can get to that actual budget is, by actually seeing the prices of things and the rates people are giving, and coming up with a worst case scenario or an average, or however you want to do it. I would recommend the worst case scenario again, but just depends on what you want to do, I guess. So when making the preliminary estimated budget top sheet, first section above the line, or ATL, you might hear it be called, is above the line. It's for all the individuals that can shape the story, make creative changes, like I said. The writer, director, executive producer. It can sometimes include the cinematographer or the director of photography, but that's really only if they're really well known. They're going to draw in people. Roger Deakins could be among that, because if you put his name on something and people like the way he shoots, the way he sets up his compositions and his framing and all of that, and when he does the camera movement, they might be more inclined to go see that, because they know it's going to look like his other stuff, or be at the quality or higher than his previous stuff. Mm-hmm. And so they're more likely to go because they know him. So only if it's really well known. But then there's also the major cast members. Like I said, if you had like Johnny Depp or someone, you're going to put them. These are the people that you might see in like a trailer where it's like, from the producers of blah, 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 or, by the writer of this, or Johnny Depp in blah, 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 blah. And that's just so it draws in an audience. These above the line people, it shows like they made this other thing. So this thing will be hopefully as good or better. And, obviously it doesn't always work out that way, but it does draw in people whenever you have a previous project that people know and they know that person. Those are the above the line. The next section is bulk. Let's see. Could include the production office staff, camera department, locations department, equipment or equipment rentals, the crew, just basically all the crew. Anyone else that I'm not going to mention, but I'm going to go through a lot of these side casts and background characters, or just lesser known cast, people who are new and nobody's going to know their name. So there's no reason for them to be like put front and center because it's not going to draw anyone in. So they're not going to get paid as much and they're going to be in this section. The grip department, the electric department, all other production departments and elements like hair and makeup, wardrobe, props, and more like line producers, AD department, PAs in that department, and UPM, unit production managers. All those things will be in there. So those are things you want to think about whenever you're making the budget, is just what departments do you need and are you leaving anyone out? Because you definitely don't want to leave anyone out. So always go over, and you can find a lot of budgets online, like templates and stuff like that, where you can actually see what they put in, and then you can see if you need that same stuff or if you need something else. And you can always start from a template already, and that's always a good thing to do anyway. So there's also, I'll get into that in a minute, but there's also software that you can buy, which is kind of like buying an editing software, but it's specifically for budgeting. And that will already have a lot of preset stuff for you. The next section is the below the line post. It's going to have all the costs of post-production, the facilities you use if you have to rent out a space, or if you're currently renting out somewhere, you'll factor that into the cost. Equipment that's going to be needed, the picture editing and the editors and their costs, the audio mix and audio design, color correction and color grade, any music that's composed or any music that needs licensed, like any songs that are already made that you need to license, stock footage if you're going to use any, the kind of like software cost if you have to buy or rent or subscribe to a different amount of softwares for different reasons, like color grading and editing and all of those things, sound design, and storage space with the hard drives and things like that, and how much you're going to use, visual effects if needed, sound effects, those kinds of things. Those will all go there. So as you can see, like mostly, if you look at it from top to bottom, it's kind of broken into pre-production, production, post-production for the first three sections, with marketing and distributing being in the fourth section. But it's just called something else. It's called above the line, below the line production, below the line post-production, and below the line other. And that's just because some of these things that are in pre-production, all of them, like the director, producer, cast, they're all going to be part of the production, and some of them will go into the post-production side as well, but they need to have their own category, their own section to be in. So that's why they're above the line. And some of the below the line production things like set design and set construction, things like that, those will probably take place in pre-production, which is why some budgets will name it like that, where it says pre-production, production, and post-production. But most budgets, the standard is to name it and to use these sections as above the line, below the line, below the line, below the line, just to keep it a little bit more standardized, I guess, so that you're not having like a production designer and the above the line section at one point and then not in the next. You'll just keep them in below the line production, because even though they're a huge part, everybody is, they're still not they're still not as big of a cost as some of these other bigger things that you'll get, a director and a cast, major cast, and A-list actors and things like that you'll have in the above the line. And then the last section is basically the marketing and distributing, but also it will have the insurance. Like I said, if there's a festival run and distributing, all those things are going to go in that section for the top sheet. And then it's just any costs that you have that aren't in the rest. So, I mean, that could be anything. That's kind of a catch-all for whatever you're going to need. Every production will be different. So you might need something very specific that doesn't really fall into these other categories. And then you would just put them in the below the line other, just so you have it somewhere on the budget, even if you don't have it in these other three sections. Now for the contingency part, this one, it has it within the below the line other section, but what a lot of people will do is they'll put it in its own section pretty much. So they won't include it with below the line other costs. It'll be its own cost so that you know exactly how much that is, and you're not factoring it into the rest of the budget. You have it kind of separate almost. But yeah, for this one, it looks like they're putting the contingency amount in with the rest of the below the line other section. Once you get to the bottom of this, it just shows the total for the below the line other, the total for the above the line, below the line production, and the grand total of the entire thing. So you'll know how much it might cost for above the line, depending on who you're trying to get and how much you're able to pay. You might say that you're able to do $2 million for above the line. For production, you're able to do $4 million. Post-production, you're able to do $1 to $2 million. And below the line other, you have like $250,000 or $500,000 or something. And then your grand total is all of that added together. And then that would be your top sheet that you show to investors and things like that. And if you get it close to to a realistic estimate, you'll be able to kind of tell them why it's going to cost that much, and that you've looked into it. And for production staff in your area, it's going to be this amount of money, and so that's the estimate you came up with. And then they'll see that you have a good idea of all of these different elements and all of these different categories and things that are going to cost money for you to make this project and be done. And they'll see you have a completed one, and they'll be able to tell you if they can give you that full amount, if they're willing to invest anything. But you're always going to need a top sheet if you're trying to get investing. It's pretty much nobody's going to give you any money if you don't even know how much money you need. So
fair enough.
This is a must.
And then also like for but then oftentimes like everyone's getting hired.
Yeah.
Like so, and I mean, if you're the writer, you're gonna send it out and then see if anyone like producing wise is interested, and then they would go from there and hire the whole.
Yeah.
Crew. And then I guess you can make different things in your deal and stuff depending, but I know that there's lots of things like big productions can do to like if you're small and stuff. So it's like, I don't know, I guess like learn as much as you can and then just apply it. So
like the more budgeting you do, the more you'll start to figure out how much a production of that size costs, and you'll be able to get a better estimate next time. The very first time you do it, you might get a vastly different actual budget compared to the estimated one that you came up with. But the more you do it, if you are doing it a lot, you will start to realize that those costs generally stay in the same ballpark. So you can kind of estimate it and get a better estimate next time and the next time and the next time as you do more and more productions.
Yeah, and then that's where you start making money. So like say you have like a system like where you know what the market is for your specific genre. So you're obviously only taking scripts that meet your specific genre, which makes complete sense.
Mm-hmm.
And then you would just like have it go well. And like once you know, like the rest is clockwork almost. Like if you know how much each section and stuff costs, like for the crew and stuff, I'm sure it's like, I mean, within range of like sometimes things do go wrong and whatnot, but for the most part, that's correct with like studios and stuff. Is like they just like make one movie and then they make another, and they're not all the same. They're all like the details and stuff are a lot different, but like the genre usually they stick to like, you know, like Hallmark does Hallmark type movies, and you know HBO does HBO. Yeah.
Right, and it could be a completely vastly different budget based on the genre and the project that it is. Like Priscilla was saying, if it's a TV show, then you don't just want to say, I have 10 episodes I want to do, and I'm going to need $10 million for the entire series. So each episode, I'm going to say cost $1 million, because each episode is going to be very different costs based on what is in that episode. There might be one that has a lot more action and stunts and things going on, and then another episode that's a little bit more calm and relaxed and more character development, where you're just inside of a location with the characters and they're not doing all that crazy stunts and stuff. So that one episode might cost $1,500,000, while the other episode that's a little more calmed down and relaxed might be $500,000. And that's why you don't want to just average it out, because that's not really going to be a good way to budget a TV show.
No, that's true. And then when it comes to TV shows or something, if you're the writer and stuff, they wouldn't just like cut you. Like if you're the writer, you would be very involved. Correct? Like whoever, like everyone would be involved. They wouldn't just
depending on the project, you'd probably be more involved in a episodic TV show where you are constantly working and coming up with ideas. And most of the time in TV shows, they don't just have one writer. They usually have multiple ones working together as well.
And then when it comes to TV shows and stuff like that, they would have them all working together and whatnot. And then if they wouldn't, I feel like business is relatively fair from what I've seen in my experience in film work across the board. It's like, it's cutthroat, but it's not, if that makes any sense. It's like, from my experience, it's relatively normalized, I guess, if that makes any sense. Like just do really good, show up, do really good, show up, do really good. And then they like work everything. And then everybody works together. Like say you have 10 writers or 5 writers or 3 writers, whatever, they'll work together, I guess. Mm-hmm. Like the teamwork mentality, like I've noticed is huge.
Right. Yeah. You have to be a good, you have to be able to show up on time and show up consistently and be a team player and all that other stuff.
And even if you're like
these projects consistently, when you're getting into the larger industry and larger sets, you have to be more specialized and you have to have a bit more of a
like I've experienced some like interesting things and whatnot, and it's like how do I say they could do like a lot of stuff, but they wouldn't just do stuff and not let you kind of like know. I don't think, unless you're just like hired. I like oftentimes like it's a weird experience that I've had where some shows you just come in and they give you very little information, and then the other shows they give you tons of information and like let you know. Kind of
it all depends on the production and
but yeah,
it all depends, because every producer is going to be different, so the way they plan it out is different and the amount of information they're willing to give is different, so it just depends on each set. But anyway, so this is from CBC. This is G in the this is G in the syllabus. If you want to check it out, she goes into some details. They go into some like one of the people talking is somebody who works in projects that are $500,000 or more for their budgets consistently, and the other person is more of a independent. I think they're a documentary filmmaker, or they help with documentary budgets, and they said like something, independent newcomer, which would be like 50,000 or less. But the principles can be applied to all sorts of budgets. It might be looking very different, but the majority of like the tips they gave can work across the board. So she said that the industry standard for productions with a $500,000 budget or more is a contingency plan of 6%. So if you have a lesser budget than that, your contingency plan should probably be larger. If you only have $50,000 for your entire production, then you probably want to have about $5,000 or 10% or more for the contingency plan added on to that. So you would have $55,000 budget projected. If you can't get that, then you would just say you have a $45,000 budget and $5,000 of that is your contingency plan. So you have to try to work it out. Again, you don't want to count your contingency plan in with the rest of the budget. You want it to be its own separate thing. That way, when you're coming up with the overall budget, if you say you have $50,000 that you need to make this project for, and you see that you are going to be over budget by $10,000, you're not going to just take it out of your contingency plan before you even start. You want to try to figure out, how do I get rid of that $10,000? Do I have to get rid of a scene? Do I have to make a character, blend a character into one? Like instead of having 3 actors, I'll have one. That way I can have all the lines coming from that one actor and only have to pay 1 person instead of 3 for that day rate. And you have to figure out creatively how to get across all of those barriers, but you don't want to just take it out of the contingency plan right away. You always want to have that in place for the production itself, because again, things can go wrong, stuff can break, days can get ruined, people cannot show up, and then the production has to be stepped behind, and that's additional costs and things like that. She also said that out of the totals that come out of sections B and C, which would be the below the line production and below the line post-production, out of those totals, you also take a producer fee of 10%. If you are on a budget that's like 500,000 or more, the standard is for the producer fee so the person creating the budget, if they're the producer, the preliminary budget, once they come up with that total, that estimate for below the line production and below the line post-production, take out 10% from each of those, add those together and say that's the producer fee. And that's just for anything that is going to cost later that the producer is going to need to do. She didn't really go into too much detail about it, but it's basically like if something comes up and you need to pay for anything, that fee is there so that you already have the money. You don't have to worry about it coming out of your actual own pocket because you've already factored it into the budget. You already have some of that. And that's just for anything that comes up that you need to pay for, which when you're a producer, you might need to give some money for somebody to go get some sandwiches or something like that. Like anything can happen. So that's why they usually give them that 10% fee, so that they have that money before they begin and they don't have to worry about paying it out of pocket. Again, larger sets will use line producers or unit production managers for the ones that write and keep up with the detailed budget after you do the top sheet. For a preliminary budget, even on larger sets, you might have the producer do it, but they might already hire somebody else to do it already, like an accountant or the line producer. So it just depends really on how it's set up. Smaller sets, you might be the director, writer, producer. And so you might also be the one who creates the budget. Just depends on how large your crew is, how much people you have, and how many people you have, and what their roles are and who's willing to do each thing and who you trust to do it for real. Because some people, this is kind of like accounting. So it's another skill set. So you definitely want to have somebody who is very detail oriented and who's going to pay attention to all the little things, because all those little things keep adding up. If everything costs 15 cents more than what you originally thought, and there's 100,000 things, that's another like $15,000 or something. So you want to be sure that you have somebody that's keeping track of all the costs, because little things start to add up, especially over time, and especially with a budget that gets larger and larger. Some budgets can be 70 pages. Like, it just depends on how big the production is. So you just want to keep track of that and make sure that you have, if you do it, just make sure that you pay it, you have those traits, that you have that you can pay attention to things and really keep track of stuff, and you're willing to put in the actual research to find the prices and all of that, and not just guess out of your head, because you're never going to get it as right as you would if you went and looked at the cost of things. If you went and asked people in the industry, asked people around your area, and shopped it around and got some rates and all of that to figure out how much it's actually going to cost. So just be sure whoever's doing this is going to do it right, because this is a huge thing. If you go over budget and you can't find the funding to continue going on, and you can't adjust the budget at anywhere because you've gone over budget on the entire project, then your project probably is never going to get done. And that happens to a lot of productions. It's, you hear these stories about these things going into production hell, and then it's like they never come out because they didn't factor in these costs, or something really big happened where they couldn't really factor in as big of a cost as it was going to be, which sucks. But generally it's just because they didn't plan it out enough, they didn't research enough, and so they didn't have all of the complete picture of how much that thing was going to cost, and they ran out of money, and then they can't do anything, and then it's over pretty much. Especially people when they're first starting out, a lot of people will say that they forget post-production. They factor in everything for production, they factor in everything for pre-production, they get it all shot, they get it all ready, and then they run out of money by the time they get to post-production, and they don't realize how much post-production is going to cost. And again, if they can't find the funding, then, well, yeah, you've shot your movie, but now you can't edit it. So what are you going to do? And you can't make it look good, and that you can't make it sound as good as it can. Are you going to do it yourself? It's probably not going to turn out as good unless you know what you're doing. And even then, one person generally isn't going to know how to do every single part of post-production as well as you would if you got a team. So those things suffer for it, and then the production it'll look worse, it'll sound worse than it would if you had factored into the budget the post-production costs, got some rates from people of how long do you think this project will take. If it's 100 minutes long, how long do you think it would take to edit if we were shooting this much footage, and blah, 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 blah. And you can kind of get a better estimate by asking people and shopping it around. So just remember, post-production, you want to be sure to factor that in before you start. And then the contingency plan, a lot of people don't put that in either when they're first starting out. They don't have any extra buffer room, any extra money to have as an emergency fund. And then because of that, they run out of money. So those types of things, a lot of productions go over budget. So one of the tips they actually gave, who gave it? You know what, I'll get to that. But they gave a tip where they're saying that you don't want to, if you're the one working the budget, if you're the one who has the budget and you're telling everyone else what their budget is, like, hey, director of photography, cameras department, this is your budget. You're going to give out the budgets to the different departments. They say don't give out the entire total, because most likely those key heads, those key department heads, they're going to go over budget. So you want to have that idea already in your head, like they're probably going to go over budget. So let's see if they can make this work. If I tell them they have $5,000 less than they do, and then if they go over budget, I still have a little buffer room before I have to get to that contingency plan fund or find other funding from other departments or from a new investor. So, I mean, It's basically just guessing that everything's going to go wrong, being realistic with it, but also just worst case scenario with the realism, so
Yeah,
that
if
you can factor it in.
all of the things that could go wrong, then you can adapt and like try to prevent that so that everything kind of goes right. It's just, you don't want to get to the point where you're like sitting in fear, but you want to do it so that it's just enough realistic, looking at it realistically, like this could go wrong, that could go wrong, this could go wrong. What would we do in these scenarios?
Right.
Kind of like that.
Yeah, because you don't want to do your dream budget where it's like, well, maybe I can get my friend to do it for 200 when really it was going to cost 600 for somebody else. Factor in that $600 person. And then if you get the $200 person, that's great. You have $400 extra if you get your entire budget, or you're able to factor that in later. But yeah, it's definitely a thing that a lot of people don't do. They try to factor in the cheapest budget that they can because, filmmaking is expensive. It's very expensive. But you have to factor those things in because you have to make a realistic amount. I might be able to get my friend for 200, but what if he's busy, or what if they're busy and they can't do it, or they don't want to work for 200, or whatever happens. Like, then it's like, well, now you're screwed because you're not going to get that other person. You're not going to get anyone else that's going to do 200 if it's a really low rate. Then it's going to be really hard for you to get anyone experienced, and that gives that same quality that you might get from a friend.
I do have to go. I have another meeting, and I'll come back to this one after I'm done.
Okay. Thanks, Sarah.
No problem. I'll see you in a few minutes.
Yep. So also from CBC, still in Liturgy, they say that there are 3 main budgeting softwares. If you are planning to use a software for it, they're standardized. And they have all of the different elements that you're going to need to look for when you're creating a production budget. Movie magic budgeting, showbiz budgeting, and EP budgeting are 3 of the main ones that are used in the industry and are standard. But if they cost money, I think I looked into it, and I think the showbiz one cost about $400 for 2 login. Or 2 installs, where you can install it on 2 different computers. So if you're trying to do it for a production team, if you have that kind of a budget and you have that amount of crew where you're having multiple people that need to look at this thing and work on it together in tandem, then it's going to go up in price. But for the lowest one where it's just for 2 installs, I think it was 400. So it's kind of the same as like maybe a little bit more than a editing software. Some of the sound softwares that you'll get is around that price too. So it's basically in that ballpark, but it is an extra cost, and it is an upfront cost that you have to pay to get it. There's also, I think the movie magic budgeting is a subscription-based one. I haven't seen if you can buy the full thing. I did see that there was a subscription version, so I'm not sure if that's all of it, or if there is a version where you can buy just it flat out. But that could be something you want to do if you don't care to own the thing and you're just using it for one project, and you can just subscribe to it, kind of like you would with Adobe if you're editing. But yeah, that way you have all those. She also said that there are free templates out there. You can Google it, and you can find any number of production templates that you can use. They're all going to be set up a bit differently based on who's doing it and what they've put into the thing, but you can always adjust it and kind of tweak it to your needs. If you have a editable like Excel sheet or Google Doc that you can download from it. And then of course, if you're going to start completely from scratch, if you just look at the way that budgets are set up, the production budgets, they're all pretty much set up the same way. The account number on the left, category, description. The top sheet, it will also include like the page, some of the times where like what page of the budget this account is on. So when you're talking about set operations on this, it'll say it's on page 5. So we go to page 5 and we see what falls under set operations. And then you break it down more that way. But for the top sheet itself, it has the pages, and then it has the total, the subtotals, and then the grand total at the bottom. And then it's like, whatever the amount of days you're shooting, the crew, who the writer director is, all that stuff at the top. And then the title of your thing, of course. So yeah, if you just go into Excel, if you've looked at a few of these documents, you can format one yourself, she said, and it works perfectly fine. You just want to always be sure that when you're using Excel, or you're not using like a software or something like that, you're using a template or Excel, you just want to make sure that the formulas are correct. So when you're doing formulas in Excel, you're going to have the director, not director. Let's say you're going to have the first assistant camera, and they have a day rate or they have a weekly rate. So you'll put like 2 times 3 times the amount of money that they make per day equals their total. And then you have 2 assistant cameras that you're going to pay for 3 days, and this is their daily rate. And so that's the total of the camera assistants on that line. And if you input the wrong thing for the formula, if you don't do multiplication, but you accidentally do division, I mean, it could happen. I don't know if you would do it, but fat fingers or something, and you accidentally press the wrong thing, and then you don't notice it, it can really change the budget overall. So you always want to double check all the numbers, double check all of the formulas, and just make sure that they are outputting correctly so that you have a correct total. Because if there is a wrong formula somewhere, it will affect the total of your project, your estimated project budget. This is from Studio Binder. Again, they're saying always budget for the worst case scenarios. If you have backup plans, you normally don't need them, but when you do have a backup plan and you do need it, you're going to be glad that you have it. So it's better to have it and not need it than to not have it at all. It does take extra time to figure it out. And it does look like it might cost more when you start, but it's just better to factor for that than to factor for the best case scenario, in which you might not get, like we were talking about with the friend and all of that. You also want to factor in your prep days, camera, the grip and electric, production design, assistant directing department. They're all going to need days or even weeks, if it's like production design and set construction and stuff like that, before the shooting begins. So those will be the prep days. So you want to factor those in, because you're going to need to pay for them to work on those days as well. Camera department might come in and set up the scene the day before with the grip and electric department, so that, or maybe a week before, depending on how big and how detailed the scene is and the choreography of the camera and everything else. They might be planning it for a while, and so they have to factor those days in to go in and plan it before you actually start shooting it. So you can't just factor in the shooting day, you have to factor in the days it's going to take for those people to be there working, setting up for the day of actual shooting. You also want to factor in any kit fees. If you're shooting on a lower budget production, you might hire crew that have their own gear, and they are probably going to charge you a kit fee to use that gear. And so you always want to factor that in. You also want to have an allowance for overtime. So overtime, it's usually going to be cheaper than adding an extra production day that you weren't expecting. So if you are running behind a few hours on set, it's usually cheaper to just bite the bullet and pay the overtime hours and have a longer extended day than it is to say, okay, well, we'll add an extra day at the end, because then you have to pay everybody a daily rate. Everybody a daily rate instead of just like a few hours, but you want to like have a budget set aside, so, or you want to have an allowance, or like factor that into your costs, because especially with newer sets, the most likely thing that's going to happen is you're going to run into overtime. You're going to go over that time you thought it was going to take to shoot this thing. And now you need to make sure you have the money to pay everybody so that they're not just leaving set because they said they get off at 10. you know, and you want to make sure that they'll stay till 12 or 1 because you're giving them that time and a half. Or it even gets to double time if it goes over a certain amount of hours, especially if you're working with a union. They're very strict on the hours and when overtime starts and when double time starts. So that'll, if you're on a non-union project, you will have that based on the contracts with the actors and the crew. And it should be pretty standard across everybody, so that everybody will say they will accept the same amount, same percent, like the time and a half at these hours and double time at these hours. So that way you're giving everybody the same amount whenever that overtime starts to hit. But you want to factor that in just in case. And then you also want to budget in pickup days, because you might get it all shot, get it into the editing room and realize that this scene looks like crap. This shot didn't work. We can see stuff in the background. There's stuff I don't like about it. The movement's not right. It just doesn't make sense how he's moving or how he's acting compared to the rest of the scenes. So now we need to go back and do a pickup shot for this part of the scene that's not working, or the entire scene entirely. Then you want to have that factored in, or at least thought about whenever you're talking about your budget. And then, they're the ones that said, when you're providing the budget breakdowns to your department keys, don't give them the full allocated numbers. They're likely to overspend on the budget than to underspend. So you always want to have a little extra to give them. So again, if you have camera department and you have 50,000 that you can give to camera department, then just tell the director of photography, hey, I can do $45,000, or I can do $40,000 for the camera department, and then see if they can make it work. And when they can't, or if they can't, you can go, okay, well, I'll give you a little extra money, because you still have that $10,000 that you originally allocated to their camera department in the first place. They also said, if you are doing a union budget, if you are doing a union production, you probably do want to go ahead and dish out the extra money for that budgeting software, because you're going to have to account for things like the fringe benefits, just like healthcare and state taxes and all those other things, which just require a little more accuracy. And you want to make sure that you are completely accurate and you're thinking about those things and you don't forget them. So, union have very set restrictions and rules to their members. And so you want to make sure that you are following all of that stuff, so you don't get any fees or shut down by the union. So always look into that and factor in the risk versus the cost of just buying the professional software for it. And this comes from Jungle Software. There's typically 3 levels of a budget. There's the top sheet that we're looking at right here. It's a general overview of costs of ATL, BTL, which is at the line, above the line, and below the line production, below the line post, below the line other. So ATL, BTL production, BTL post, and BTL other. Then you have the account level, which is a bit more detailed. And I'm actually going to show it. I downloaded this from Studio Binder. And so this first part is the top sheet. You'll see this kind of information for the production company, the title, the producers. Excuse me. And then you have the above the line section that shows like the development cost, story rights, producer unit. You can add things in here or take them out depending on what you need in your budget. And then it shows like the total productions costs and all that. That's the thing we've been looking at this whole time. And then they go in a little more detail. They break it down a little more for that, more like the account level. And so then you can see like within development costs, well, on the top sheet, that's just one line right here, development costs, and it's in the above the line section. Now, when we go into that, we break it down a little further. And we see within the development cost, there's like the office expenses, survey and scouting, travel expenses, legal, story and rights, the writers, if you're purchasing the script, any script copies you have to make, all that stuff. Producer unit, which is producer, co-producer, assistant producers, all of that stuff. When on the top sheet, it's just one line. And so you'll come up with these estimates and you'll get it. And then you will factor that into the budget. So this could be, well, this is more like the detailed level, but there's the second level is the account level, which is just a more detailed view, with each department has an account number. If you can look at that, we can even see right here. They put it as 1100, 1200, 1300. And then when you go down to production expenses, it's 2000, and it's in the 20s, and then it goes all the way to the 39. And that's just to give each thing a different accounting number. So that when you're talking about set construction, this is where in budgeting and accounting and stuff, you have like the different accounts. You have 2300 is for set construction. And within set construction, I think it's under production. Then set construction are all these different elements, but all together they make up the $2,300, or not dollar, 2,300 account number. So it's like 2301, 2302, 2303. That's just to keep them all together, and so you can have a total budget for each department instead of having a budget for the overall production only. You'll want to break it down so that everything's kind of in its own little group. And that's where whenever you have like a line producer or a unit production manager working on it, they'll have to look into the budget and see, okay, what account can we take out of? We don't need as much for the art director as we thought. So now we can take out of the account 2,200, and the set construction, the wood was more expensive than we thought it was going to be. So now we can take that money away from the art director and account 2,200 and put it to the wood and the equipment or whatever the purchase is in 2,300. And so then they're constantly working to figure out where they can take away money and give money to, so that everything stays within the budget and doesn't go over if they can help. And the detailed level, kind of like this actually. The detailed level is line by line detailed to show the per day and hour cost and further accounting of the cost. So you have the key grip and you say how many you need. I'm gonna have one. I don't know what unit would be. Then you multiply it by whatever it is times their rate. So $400 a day. And then it does the total right there. And then you see that the subtotal should start having that number in it as well. That's weird. Anyway, and then like all these numbers would add up to have the total for that account number, that department, 2,400, which is set operations. And this is set up a bit differently than like other budgets, of course. And if you get into the professional ones, it's way more detailed and more accurate to how you would do it on a huge budget production. But this is set up and tailored more towards like a lower budget production. Studio Binder is more for like the lower budget side of things. So their stuff is set up in a more easy and simple way to follow than you would get if you did. It is a bit of a learning curve if you have a professional, detailed budget on a software than what you'll find if you download a free one on the internet, of course.
I would like to say that the unit is probably the number of people that you may have on a set. And so you multiply that with the cost.
Oh, so what's amount?
Sorry?
So what would amount be then?
The unit would be, let's say if you have 2 key grips, right?
Right.
then the unit would be 2. And then the amount would be whatever they charge per unit.
Well, then they have the rate. I'm just a little confused by how they set it up is all, because like they have amount, then unit times the rate.
The amount, the rate is per day rate, right? Or probably per hour rate or whatever.
Right.
So as many number of units that.
Oh, I think that's what unit is. I think it'd be like day or week.
Right. That's right. Whatever the rate is pertaining
so
to
the
that
amount is how many you have. The unit is whether it's by the day, the hour, or the week, multiplied, which would be X, by the rate that they have.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think if you look at the total, it'll tell you the math there.
So if we did 2 days, then it changes to 800. See? So the way they set it up is like they have that formula in there. You just want to be sure. But yeah, as you can see, it's not showing up at the subtotal for this account number, which is a problem because
math is not there. Just put 1 for unit, 3 for unit, and see what you get.
3 for unit.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, it stays 800. So I really think the unit is based on like whether it's by day or by week.
Oh, okay. Yeah, usually
you say it's like 2 weeks. You're gonna have them, and they kind of cost $3,000 a week.
CAB?
What?
CAB.
What? You're cutting out. What'd you say?
Yeah, I was like, yeah, and then it cut out.
Fish.
Maybe type it.
I don't know. I think it's like
it's definitely the internet because I can sometimes hear it, like pieces of it, and then it disconnects.
See, that's why it's only showing the subtotal. It's only the way this is set up. This is for free one that I got online. And it only has it going from row 70 to row 73. And I want to bring that up to include the entire thing. So now it has that. And then if we did like Best Boy Grip, we're going to have one of those. We're going to pay them by the week. And their amount is $1,000 a week. Yeah. And these numbers are just whatever because it doesn't really mean. But now you can see that the subtotal for this account, for the all of set operations account, is now $7,000. And so then when you're making a budget, you're going to go line by line, breaking it down into how much it's going to cost. And you're going to base it on, like I said, you're not just going to make up these numbers like I've been doing because I have no idea what these actual amounts would be in my area if I was going to shoot here or New York or California. Those are going to be vastly different, and the weekly rates are going to be very different for these different department roles, and it'll be extremely different if I go from union to non-union. So those are some things you want to think about. But yeah, so when you're doing a budget, you're going to go down and you're going to break it down like that, and then
I think, honey.
Yeah.
I think I hear Vish trying to talk again.
Oh, Vish, you here?
Yeah, I got dropped out. Sorry.
Okay.
Did you figure out what that tab was? TAB?
Tab? No, I'm actually not sure what tab is.
Something in between. I don't know. Anyway, some sort of math. I think I wanted to add. These are basically what you have is like.
I know what it is. It's just the tab, like down here. Tab 1 is above the line. Tab 2 is production expenses. It's just showing where at in the budget it is. So I guess if you're taking like a specific part,
okay,
you'll be able to quickly find it.
Right. Yeah.
Instead of page, because this is a tab, so that's why. That's usually where you'd put page. If you were working on a different, if you were working on like a budget that had it per page, kind of like in a Word document format or something, you would have it like that. And that's so if somebody's looking at it and they're saying, hey, why does key grip cost $6,000? Let me look at that. And then they go into the
On that ledger account.
budget and they figure it and they see where it's at and then they look at it.
Right. That would be same like the tab. So the tab would be essentially another ledger account which will have details of all the set operations. Whatever is involved in the set operations, that will be listed in there. It's almost like when you're doing your taxes, you have schedules, schedule A, B, C, D.
Mm-hmm.
And these are all pretty much go on to the top page where you're individually, doing the schedules separately, and then they get integrated into your top page.
Right.
So it's very, very similar to that. But also, I think, I guess the top page, does this one have a contingency?
Let me see, top sheet. Yes, right here.
Okay. So they just calculate the math out there, is it?
Yeah, they have 10%. I'm pretty sure you can just edit that and make whatever you want. They already have something filled in. That's just as a, that's because I put the 7. Oh, cool. It already carries over. That's cool. So that's something that theirs does is under set operations, it already carried over. In the budgeting software that you buy, that you pay for, it'll do the same thing pretty much. You'll break it down. And you don't really have to carry over the numbers and everything. It'll just show up on your top sheet because it's under that account number. So when we go to that account number, 2,500, it says 7,000 because we put 7,000 as our subtotal because we said we're going to pay 2 key grips and each at a 3,000. Even though you wouldn't have 2 key grips most of the time, you'd have 1. But let's just say we did that. And then Best Boy, we did 2. Well, now we're paying 7,000 and we haven't even gone down this whole list, but let's say that that's all we need for this whole entire account. We don't even need anyone else for this production. Specifically, we just need these 2 people or 3 people. So it's going to cost us 7,000 based on we talked to some people and we figured out their rates are going to be around this price. For the key grip, each one they would be around 1,500 per week. And for the Best Boy grip, it would be around 1,000 a week. And then you can do it by the amount of weeks you're doing it for. So we only need them for 1 week. So that's where this would be. If we said we need both the key grips for 2 weeks, actually. Well, now we're changing the cost and making it 13,000 because we're doubling that price. If we say we need them for 8 weeks, it's the same thing. It's just going to keep multiplying it, giving you that total. And then it's going to give you the subtotal based on all your findings. So we need all these people for 8 weeks, but we only need 2 of them. This is a very not real budget, but just to show an example. Set operations, 2,500. We go back to the top sheet. Now we can see it's at $56,000. And because that contingency is set to 10%, it's going to show 5,600.
Cool.
And now our grand total right now, just from filling in those 2 slots, if that was really the amount that we'd have to give those 2 people, and that's all we needed for this, then our grand total would be 63,280 just from that. And then you go from each one of those things above the line, you go in and you say the director is going to be paid this and the cast is going to be paid that. We have the lead cast. See, this is where I would change it up. I would not have lead cast set. This is where you see it's more of a lower budget. It's based more for lower budgets, because if you have lead cast and you say you have 3 lead characters and you want to pay them around the same, then you have them just under this line item right here. Compared to if you have a larger budget production, a higher named actor or somebody who's worked out a better deal is going to be paid a significant difference compared to other key actors. You look at Avengers alone, they had Robert Downey Jr., I think, made the most out of them. He's the most seasoned actor amongst them, and he's been in the most of their movies up to that point. So he was able to get a big chunk more than the rest of them. And so you wouldn't just want to put them all together on one line item if you're making a more professionalized budget.
Least cast.
What was that?
I don't know. You can probably have something like lead cast 1, lead cast 2, lead cast 3.
Yeah. And you can always just add some extras in here and adjust it around to make it fit what you need. But I was just pointing that out because this one just has it like this. And that's something that you normally want to avoid if you're having different priced apps.
I would imagine you'd probably, with an ensemble, it would probably be like main character, main cast, and then the rest, right?
Yeah, because you'd be like lead, you would say like lead, and then in other budgets, let's see if I can see it.
Because sometimes there is a main character, but there's also a main cast, like cast of characters, but there's like one that's the titular, like the main one. Or the one that's going to be paid the most, the one that's going to have the most screen time, or sometimes the one that is going to have less screen time, but because he's more of a veteran actor and more of a big name and will bring more to the movie or show or whatever, will be paid a little bit more.
Can't really find it, but I've seen budgets where instead of set up like this, it says like,
see in that
under unit or something like that, they'd put the name instead of putting like just that there's 3 lead cast. They put whoever the person is and their character name maybe. So at cast, you might put the name of the character.
Yeah, like that makes sense.
Johnny Depp. I guess it doesn't have to be capitalized, but Johnny Depp, and there's only one of him. And then, it's like, we're going to pay him by the week, and he's going to get a rate of, I don't know, $5 million.
See, also, I think the other thing is this above the line, right? Not, if this is the sheet for above the line, then it doesn't, I don't know if it is correct, because the supporting cast and the day players and the stunt, they don't come under above the line.
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
Right.
I don't know what's going on.
Supporting cast and day players, they go under the production expenses. So that is something like if you're getting it from online, like I just downloaded this to show everybody.
Yes,
it's not going to be completely set to standard for a high budget. This one is specifically for lower budget productions. It's for independent projects where you probably won't have Johnny Depp in your film. And you probably won't have $5 million, or you might not even have 70,000. So it's for like that type of thing. And that's why, like, for supporting, if you're buying an actual, if you're buying the software to do the budget, it will have all these things in the correct places. Right. Because a lot of this stuff, like Vish just said, it's like it doesn't actually belong above the line.
Yeah, it's a very baseline, a template kind of thing. You have to modify it based on how you want it.
Right.
It's good structure.
Yeah. Different. Yeah, it's a good starting point to get used to it. It's not going to be completely accurate. Looping and ADR, that's going to be in post-production. So that wouldn't even be in the above the line necessarily.
Yeah. Is this from Jungle Software?
No, this is from Studio Binder.
Studio Binder. I wanted to add, that you mentioned about movie magic. So movie magic, movie magic budgeting also has a movie magic scheduling. It's called movie scheduling, movie scheduling and movie budgeting. So those are 2 softwares from the same company, and they kind of interlink with each other. So it picks up a lot of stuff from scheduling into the budgeting information. So you don't have to really type twice. So if you do,
they offer, do you know if they offer like a kind of like how Adobe does a package deal? Do they do that, or do they have to do them separately?
Scheduling, I think, they do have a package deal. Yes, they have both can be purchased together, but they also sell it separately.
Okay, cool.
Scheduling is a little cheaper. The budgeting is a little higher. I think I don't know. You said 5,000. Is that 500? How much is that?
Oh no, I was talking about what is the other one called? Let me see. Showbiz budgeting is about 400 for 2 installs, so you can install on 2 computers. For the movie magic budgeting, it was, I can't remember the price, but it was based on a subscription price. So I think it was like $20, $25 or $30 a month, something like that.
I see. Yeah, I've not used it, but I heard it's pretty good. I've used the scheduling software, which is also pretty good.
Mm-hmm. Nice. But yeah, so that's always an option. And you always, of course, you always want to pay attention to that kind of thing. Because I didn't even notice it. Thank you for pointing it out, Bish. But so when you're going line by line, if you were going to use this, that's where you would start taking things out that you don't need, or you want to change where it belongs. And so if you're making it and you do have those A-list actors, well, now you need to add a little bit of extra rows for those other characters and those other actors and how much they're going to cost. And then you're going to readjust these numbers so that it lines up 1401 all the way through whatever, so that it still lines up into the account number of 1400, 1400. So because generally you're not going to have 99 different lines of items of things that's going to go into another budget like 1500. So that's why you can keep these two separate. Have 1400 have all the things that belong with cast, and then 1500 have all the things belonging with traveling and living, like hotels and all that. So yeah, so if we were going to do this, we would take out some of this stuff, readjust it over somewhere else. And then because this is already a pre-set up, the formulas are already pre-set up, but as we saw, one of them was already messed up. The set operations, the formula wasn't taking into account all of the stuff. So I had to change it to say that I want it to go from there to there, because it was only going from here to there and it wasn't picking up anything and making the total look at 0. And that's where the formulas can start to mess up if you're doing Excel or if you're doing it yourself. You just want to be sure that they're all still accurate. So if we were going to add some stuff or take some stuff out of here, we just want to make sure that this box is still only grabbing the information that we want it to grab. It's not extending past and it's not going under, because that's going to vastly affect the total. But yeah, so that's what you would do. You would go through, you would figure out, you would call the dolly grip up and say, hey, I know I saw you some, the quality that you want. You'd call that type of crew member that you think has the quality that you're looking for. And you would say, hey, how much would you charge for a week of work if you were to work 5 weeks on a feature film? And then you figure out how much they charge. And then you call 2 or 3 more people, other dolly grips that you know, or not that you know, but that are around the area. And you say, hi, how much would you charge? How much would you charge? And you come to a general idea of how much it's going to cost for a dolly grip in your area. You put that in. Your estimated budget is saying that they're going to cost $1,000 a week, like the best boy. And then you just factor all that in. You go back to your top sheet, and now you have a general budget idea after you fill out everything. And you can see your grand total. And then you go, all right, that's the amount we need if we're going to make it as is. If we're going to make it exactly as we need it right now, according to the script, and you factor it out everything, and you've looked into all that stuff, this is the total amount we need. And then you bring this top sheet to all of your investors, potential investors, or you send it off to the grant or the other things that you're trying to acquire funding, the different ways you're trying to acquire funding and financing. You send it out to them to show them, you've done the work and that you know how much it's going to cost because you've looked into it. And then they'll send back their yeses, their nos, or their, hey, we can only do this much. We can't do 5,700,000, but we will do 5 million. All right. Now we need to go back into the budget and figure out where we might be able to charge differently. Maybe we can talk to Johnny Depp. Maybe we can, beg and plead with him, and we do, and we find out he really likes the project and he's going to do it for 4 million instead, when he was going to normally do it for 5 million. But he really likes the project, so he's willing to take a pay cut in what he would normally accept. All right, cool. Now we just saved $1 million. I mean, it's not going to be that easy, but that's just an example. And there you go. And then you go back to your top sheet. Now we're under that budget. They gave us 5 million. We have 400,000 to work with, and that's even including the contingency plan. Our whole budget is less than this. That's with the contingency plan. Without the contingency plan, our total budget, oh shoot, they don't have the area. Well, without the total budget, without the 405,000, it'd be like, I don't know, 4,100,000 something. So there you go. And that would be the total. And then you can start to work out what you need from there. But that's the general sense of making a budget. Each budget is going to be different depending on the different things that you're going to need. But generally, all are going to have the director, the producer, screenwriter, camera department, assistant directing department, locations, production design, props department, wardrobe department, hair and makeup, the cast, the lead cast, the background actors, the supporting cast, production office / production department, grip department, electric department, continuity, post-production for sound, editing, music, and color, marketing, insurance for the equipment and for the people. So production insurance, all the different insurances that go into that, distribution, prices and costs, sound department, and equipment, either rentals or buying prices, transportation and housing for the different actors and crew members that are traveling, or if you are traveling as an entire cast and crew to a different location, or you're filming in multiple locations, that stuff's got to get factored in. And then you might have stuff like stunts, visual effects, special effects, things like that, depending on what your project is. Also, you're definitely going to have craft and catering, so food and those costs. And those are all things that you want to factor in. So when you're doing a budget, you're going to look at it line by line like that, and then you're going to add or take away anything that you don't really need. But you always want to try to see if you can group it into a group, because usually these things, if you look at that's why you want to look at other people's budgets, production budgets online, because you can see where they have categorized these different things, what falls under which department. Like we've already said, under above the line, you're not going to have some of this stuff that's in here, like the day players. They're definitely not going to be in there. They would be under production because they're not lead cast, they're background actors. And so you just don't factor them into above the line. Above the line is solely for those, well, not solely, but for the most part, it is solely for the names that you're going to see in the trailers or in the advertisements for that project to draw people in. It's from the producers of, written by the person who wrote this, based on this book, which is the story rights. Lord of the Rings show coming up. Well, it's based on Lord of the Rings book, or it's based on their legendarium or something like that. So that's the story rights.
Whatever they decide to interpret it as.
Yeah. And then the producer cost. It's the producer who did Game of Thrones, maybe, in this new show has a Game of Thrones producer, or has the Game of Thrones director who directed 3 episodes. And they're rated the best episodes of all of them, or something like that. And so those names would be there. Or, it has John, what's that guy's name? Jon Snow.
Kit Harington.
Kit Harington, yeah. So, you know, after a big show takes off like that, you start seeing the actors' names appear in more projects as a draw, as a, hey, look, it's this person. You know them. They're from Game of Thrones. So come watch this thing because they picked a BNR thing. And so that's the draw. And that's where those above the lines come in. That's the majority of the above the line is just going to be those big names, those big costs to get or just the people who have the creative rights to adjust the story and adjust the script and all of that. So that's where that category, that section of the top sheet is for.
I would like to also add is that sometimes they have these templates. Maybe in the Studio Binder they have a template which has maybe not the template, but somebody's budget that has all the details in it. So you don't really have to do too much of plugging, just the unit numbers and the rates, and whatnot. I think you need to change for your locality, as you mentioned. That makes it a little easier also, because otherwise you're trying to figure out, what these each rows and columns are.
Right.
Take you.
Yeah, definitely. Like we were trying to do just then. In No Film School, if you want to look into it, they have the webpage, the film budget template, where they share their own template. I don't know if they share the one that I'm using right now or if it's something else, but they kind of just talk about the different things like above the line crew and who it is and why you might need to have them in the above the line screenwriter, producer, director of photography sometimes. And they even say like traditionally they're put below the line. However, sometimes they always are an integral part of the production, and they tend to have higher wages than the rest of the crew. And sometimes if they're like Roger Deakins, there you go, it's a name drop. Hey, Roger Deakins, he's made these other films you like. Watch this one. Below the line crew, he goes in and shows kind of all the different departments, or at least a big majority of them, and a lot of the different roles that fall under that. Set PAs, you might say you need 10, or you might need 3. You might just want to have 1. So, it just depends. And that's where you would go into your budget and set those rates and those different things. And it just kind of talks about the different departments you'll have on most of them, most everything. And then talks about like for pre-production costs, where you might have some costs go in, rehearsals, things like that. They're going to cost, they might not cost the same amount as a day on set for that person, but it'll still cost something most of the time, or at least travel or food for that day, if they're there for a long period. And then, your equipment, production design, costume, hair, makeup, catering, all these things that we were just talking about. But if you want to go on there and you can when we're doing our exercise for this, I would say if you are still stuck and you don't know what to do, go on like this website or another article, another blog, and check out what they say needs to go into a thing, into a budget, because they usually list a good majority of what you're going to find in a budget anyway. So yeah, that's it for that. For the actual exercise, I'm going to see a few different of the templates and see which one I like best. I might tweak it and make it kind of my own. I might use the one I was just showing you guys from Studio Binder, and I might just tweak it based on how I think it should be set up. And then I'll be sending that out to everybody, or sending out where you can get your own template, different templates, because all of them are set up differently a little bit. And then we will use that information. It's going to be due on February 28th. So same time as the editing style exercise and the sound tool editing exercise. that's going to be due on the same day. So we're going over all three of those things the same day. That way we can knock it all out on the same day, depending on who's doing it and how many people have done it. We can get it all done and review it and just kind of give some feedback, or just, I don't know, just have that exercise to be done. And this is, again, all this is for is so that you look into these different things. You see how much it's going to cost. You don't have to be exactly accurate and perfectly right. This is your first time doing it. Me and Priscilla probably aren't going to be right, because like, even though we know a little bit more and we've done a few things here and there, like there's still things that you don't think of sometimes. There's still things that you don't account for. And so, just try to get it close. It's just to get used to budgeting, to get used to looking into these things and seeing why these things cost so much. Because that's a huge thing that a lot of new people don't understand when they're first starting out. They don't understand that they can't get this short film that they want to make a 20-minute short film done that has 7 locations done for $500. Like, it's just not going to, maybe, but for the most part, that's not really going to happen, because you have to pay the people and you have to pay the equipment, or you have to find the equipment or have it already. And so doing it for $500 is going to be very, very hard and bare bones compared to what they might be thinking. And I've seen a lot of people do that, where they just think something's going to cost way cheaper than what it probably will cost based on what they're trying to do, especially if they're trying to do visual effects and stuff like that. They just don't factor in those different numbers and things, because they don't really know how much everything costs. So this exercise is mainly just to get everyone a little more used to the numbers. It's not the best, most fun part of film. Budgeting is pretty boring, I would say. And it's probably one of the least favorite things a lot of filmmakers go through is financing and budgeting, but it is one of the most important things. And if you have it right, and you have those backup plans and all of that, you have a better chance of your project getting completed, you being trusted to do another project later, and you to meet the budget and possibly even get a profit based on all the research you've done. So we'll be doing that. And I'll be sending out an email after the meeting. Well, tomorrow or something, I'll be sending out an email talking about what's going into that exercise. And I think, what is that? That is, they'll give you about a week and a half to do it. And we're going to do it based on that scene in the kitchen. So it's not too much stuff going on. It's just based on one scene. That guy gets mad at the girl for not loving him the same way he loves her, and then he kills her. And so, there's some special effects, maybe some blood makeup and whatever else that you might need. But everybody will do their own script breakdown of it, and then factor in all of those costs and elements and how much crew are needed and how much equipment, and really try to look into how much equipment costs around your area, how much you might get for a person around your area for each role you need for the director of photography, or if you are doing it, how many roles can you take on yourself? You always want to factor in these other things just in case, because it's always better to have a bigger budget and then have to take it down, and have a smaller budget and have to add more money to it somehow. Again, so that's all I'll say on that. Does anyone have any comments or anything to add to that, or questions for the budget? All right. So we're moving on from budget. Now we're going to talk about tripods. Oh, vicious come back. We're talking about tripods and monopods. Oh, actually, wait. Yeah, sorry. Tripods and monopods. So, first of all, when you're getting a tripod, you want to make sure, and this is from Parker Walbeck, B in the syllabus. You guys want to watch his video. He does the full-time filmmaker course. And so he's done like a lot. He's more towards like videography stuff and like corporate videos and things like that. But he also talks about filmmaking, short films, and that kind of thing. So for tripods, you want to make sure that you have a fluid head tripod, first of all. Fluid heads allow for smooth fluid movement for the tilts, pans, or for both. And those are both things you want in a tripod for film. You want to have smooth movement. If you get a ball head or you get some of these other types of heads that come on a tripod, which if you don't know, the head is the part that's right on the top. It connects to the legs, which is just the 3 extending parts that you put on the ground. The head has the little handle and it has the quick release plate, which we'll look into a little bit. And then you can, for film, you want the ones that can do tilting and panning for the most part. You don't want really others. There's a 3-way head that has you can roll the camera to the side, but in film, you're not really going to use that as much as you would maybe for photography, to set up for portrait mode and then to set up for landscape mode. So generally speaking, fluid head with the pan and the tilt are going to be what you're going for if you're making a narrative project. Tripods can range in price from a lot of money. I think overkill, $23,000 just for this one, to something really cheap like the one I was just on, which is about $22.99 on Best Buy. And you can see the difference in quality and make and sturdiness that is probably going to come from it, with the legs and the material. A lot of plastic, very thin, looks very lightweight for that $22 one. When you have a $23,000 one, it's more heavy duty, has a lot more stuff going on, a lot more stability. And that fluid head is very complex and has a lot of stuff going into it to make sure it has those as smooth movements as possible.
Yeah, I would like to add is, if you're putting a $50,000 camera on the tripod, your tripod better be good. Otherwise.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, if you have like a very expensive camera and you're buying a $20 tripod, it's more likely this thing's not gonna be able to handle it. And if someone bumps into it, the whole thing might fall over and collapse. And now your $50,000 camera is a bunch of pieces of metal and plastic.
Stop.
Yeah. So with the $25 ones and stuff like that, most people, you're going to find that the cheapest ones aren't going to cut it for what you need. And the most expensive ones are going to be overkill for what you need. And the most expensive ones are for like very, very, very professional. Every day they're working on it kind of sets, and they're using it because they have these huge fancy cameras. And sometimes they don't even go all the way up, because I think Brian's talked about this before, but like, I think news and certain TV have like the really big cameras that are like 50 pounds and stuff like that. So they're the ones that might require these way more heavy duty tripods than if you just were doing a filmmaking project or a narrative project where you can kind of set up things and don't have as big and bulky of cameras as you do on those projects that are running 24 hours or that are running for long periods of time in the day. But, the more professional you get, the smoother the movements are going to be, the more little features it might have. And obviously this fluid head's a lot bigger. It has the plate's a lot larger. It has 2 areas for locking it into the camera compared to like this little one that has just that little area for the camera to go on. So if you have a big long camera and you're putting it on, or you have a long lens, it's going to be sticking off the edge, where on this one you'd have it over the top of the whole thing. But again, like this is the crazy, like ridiculous price for a tripod, like the highest end. So you don't really want to worry about this until you get to the point where you feel like it's going to be useful. Another thing that these types of tripods that cost this much is just the speed. at which they are able to be set up, and the, you know, how sturdy they are with how speedy they are to set up, because every second counts for that. Yeah, Vish, that's right. Vish said heavy, it's heavy to carry around too. So that's another thing to think about whenever you're talking about tripods, is how heavy is it? Am I going to be bringing it around a lot of places? Am I going to be moving around a lot? Because if I can just set it up once and be done, then, you know, the weight doesn't matter as much. But if I'm traveling, if I'm flying to the location, then the weight is going to matter a bunch, because I have to bring that with me and I have to find somewhere to put it, in a bag or whatever. And the lighter weight ones are going to be a lot easier for maneuvering and for bringing it around. And if you're going to a location, like let's say you're going to film at a park, and you bring in your equipment so that you can kind of scout out the place, and you're bringing around this big heavy tripod, you're going to start feeling it a lot faster than you would if you had a lighter weight one where you're carrying it around just to go and get some quick ideas of compositions and shots that might work in that area. So weight is another thing to consider. And also, like they said, how much weight the tripod can handle. That's another thing. So the more expensive ones, obviously, most of the time can handle more weight on their heads. So you can have more weight, a larger camera. The smaller ones are more for like the DSLR or something that's kind of more small compared to like a cinema camera or one of those big news cameras and things like that that require a more heavy set, sturdy tripod to keep safe and to make sure it doesn't wobble or fall over. Again, this is on the highest end. I've seen really good tripods that are around maybe like $2,500. Still very expensive, but has a lot of the same features. Parker Walbeck, actually, if you watch his video, he goes over his different tripods that he uses personally. And one of his is that $2,500 one, and one's a $75 one. And then he has a middle one that's like $500, and he goes over the pros and cons of each, and talks about what you might want to look for and why he feels he needed that $2,500 one and why he feels like not everyone does. He specifically mentions that, you know, if you're not going to film stuff consistently for a long time, and you're not going to have, and you're going to be doing traveling a lot more than just having it in one location, then you're not going to want one of these bigger, bulkier, more expensive tripods. You're just going to want something a little more cheap, something to give you that sturdy stability without breaking your bank. So something to think about whenever you're talking about tripods. You don't always want to go for the most expensive, because sometimes you don't even need the most expensive, and sometimes it's actually less beneficial for you, for your specific circumstances, to get the more expensive one, because they are made just like for mics. They are made for certain circumstances. Some are made more for a studio setting production, where you are leaving it in the same area for the most part, and it's just really sturdy so that it doesn't get knocked over. Some are a lot more lightweight and compact. You can break it down to really compact it down to a small size so that it's easy to carry, or you can put it in your bag to travel with, and it's not going to take up too much room, but it's still going to give you enough stability for what you need. And so, yeah, you just want to look at all these different things and not just go for the most expensive, but it is good to know price ranges. Let me see. All this is stuff I just said. You also want to think about the adjustable height. I can X out of these. The adjustable height is another thing you want to consider when you're talking about a tripod, because you want to make sure that it is about at your eye level or a little bit above your eye level whenever you fully extend it. Some tripods will only go to about 4 or 5 feet, while others will go to 6 or 7 feet. So it's good to have something that fits That goes with how tall you are, first of all, because you don't want to have to bend over to look at the viewfinder and see, or look at the monitor to see what's going on and what your composition looks like. You want to have one that can meet your height and what you need, or maybe higher than how tall you are, so that you can get over things if you're trying to maybe film over a bush or something and you want to extend the tripod up as tall as it can go so that you can film over that bush with just a little bit of that foreground element. And so the height of the tripod is something you want to look out for, but also not just how tall it can go. You want to also think about how low it can go, because you might want the tripod to go really far down towards the ground and get a really low shot, somebody's feet, or just a really low angle view on your subject. Certain tripods will be more flexible with their legs and can extend out, getting them really close to the ground, and some are not, and they can't get nearly as far as maybe something like you see in the picture here. So that's something you want to look at as well, the minimum height and the maximum height that tripod can extend and retract to. Next thing you want to think about when you're talking about tripods is the kind of latches or latch type that it has. On some of the cheaper models, for the most part, you'll find some of these twists where you can unscrew it or screw it to lock it or unlock it. And these are the different sections of the tripod. So every tripod will be broken into different amounts of sections, like 3 sections that you can extend out or retract, or 2 or 1, depending on what kind of tripod you're getting. I think the majority of them have 3 sections, but don't quote me on that. Either way, when you have these sections and you have these different latches, the screw ones are just going to take a bit longer. It could only be a few seconds longer. It could be, not too much longer, but it will take a bit longer than the latches that you see on the left, where all you'd have to do is pull it out and unlatch it so that it comes loose and then push it in to get it tightened. Another problem Parker Waldeck was saying is in the cheaper models for tripods and cheaper models, if they do have those latches, it might actually be worse. On a cheaper model, you might want to have those twistable locks, because then you can twist it further to lock it harder, compared to those the latches, which on cheaper models sometimes they just don't latch tight enough, basically, and then if you put a lot of weight on the top part, it might start sinking down and not extending the way you want it to. So that's something to look out for if you're trying to go on the cheaper end of tripods. Is you might actually want this twisting mechanism instead of the latches. But I found that anything over about $75 for the latches works pretty well. For the most part, I don't know all the tripods out there, but from the ones I've seen and the ones I've looked at and the ones I've actually used, the ones over $75, generally speaking, the latches are going to be better for you because they're just going to be a little bit quicker. And when you're on set, speed is a very significant factor into the worth of the equipment. If the equipment can be set up really quickly and it's sturdy and it's good to go, then you want something that can be quicker than something that takes longer, because every second counts. Time is money, and you don't want to have those people go into overtime. So if you can cut off 20 seconds every time you set up your tripod and you set it up 15 times in the day, well, you just cut out several minutes that, maybe saves you from going into overtime later. So those are just things to consider. The next thing, which I don't think I have a picture of, let me see. Next thing most tripods have is, this thing that is like a bubble leveler. These little, it's like just basically it's either water or some kind of liquid that's inside of, I don't think it's water, but it's some kind of liquid that's inside of this little plastic piece, and it has a little air bubble that shows so that you can line it up to make it even. You can make sure that the that the tripod is even with the ground, because if it's not in that center circle, then if you're panning or you're tilting, it might start curving in a way you don't want. So being able to see on the tripod itself where the leveler is, like if the bubble's right into the direct center, then you can see that it's level and that it's not off axis at all. And or you can make adjustments to make sure that it gets to be like that. Unless you're intentionally trying to make it kind of like a tilted angle, then you might want to have that bubble just to show you that it's tilted to the left or right. Some of them though, like for some tripods, another good thing about some of the more expensive ones, I don't know about this one, but is when you have that leveler, you have a little piece on the head that you can unscrew or just unclamp, which loosens it just so you can move just the head around as a whole. So you can kind of readjust the head to make sure that the whole thing gets leveled, compared to some other tripods, especially the lower end budget ones, where you would have to adjust the legs and everything to make it level. And that's just going to take longer and be harder to get accurate compared to just seeing it happen on the head as you're moving the head around trying to get it level. That's something to look at or to think about when we're talking about tripods. Sorry, there we go. So he also goes on to say that for these quick release plates, which is these little plates that you can slide in and out of the head of a tripod, where you attach that to your camera, and then you can quickly slide it into these different plates. And a lot of these different pieces of equipment like sliders, dollies, tripods, and other things like what is it called? Gimbals. Yeah, there we go. So like gimbals and stuff like that, the different pieces of equipment will have their own parts where you can slide in these attachable quick release plates. And that way you don't have to constantly unscrew it from your camera and screw it into the other one, into the other piece of equipment. You can just quickly release it from that piece of equipment by pressing the locking mechanism or unscrewing the locking mechanism, taking it off and putting it on the other piece of equipment you need. Again, it's about speed. It's about how quick it is. So one of the things you want to look at when you're talking about a tripod is what kind of quick release plates does it use? Does it use something like this, which is a little more cheap and it's not going to attach to as much equipment? Or does it use something that's a bit more standard and might go with more pieces of equipment? And he says the Manfrotto, their quick release plates are pretty standard in the industry right now. So even though all tripods will have the quick release plates, these Manfrotto ones are some of the best to have because they go with the most equipment, just because they're the most standardized version. Not the one I have on screen. Let me see if I can get it. I don't know if I can spell it right. Manfrotto quick release plate. So something more like that you might find, and it might attach to more pieces of equipment than you would have if you got something that's of a different kind. Now you'd have to look into the different ones because I'm sure there's multiple different variations on the Manfrotto, as I can see in these other pictures, there actually are. So you have to look at that and see like if they are attachable to the other pieces of equipment you have. It's not a necessity because you can always unscrew the camera and screw it into the other quick release plate for your other equipment. But if you can have something that's compatible with the rest of your equipment, it just makes it a lot faster and a lot easier to switch from one piece of equipment to the next. So instead of, well, we're using a tripod shot and then we're going to use a sliding shot for the next thing, I can quickly just quick release it and put it on the other piece of equipment without unscrewing it and screwing it in, causing extra time and extra waiting around for the next shot to be able to begin. Another thing you want to keep in mind when you're talking about tripods is not every single one of them is going to come with the head, with the fluid head. So you want to be aware of that, especially when you get more expensive. That piece where that little metal extender is in the middle, the part on top of that would be the head, or I guess that little metal piece would be part of the head, and you unscrew it from the tripod legs. And so that, if you're buying that tripod online, especially online, you might find it, you know, it usually sells for $200, but I found one that says it's only $100. Well, they might be selling you just the legs. So you got to be aware of that and just look at it and make sure that you are buying what you actually think you're buying, and you're not missing the head or the equipment that you think you're going to need, because not every tripod is going to be sold with these different heads. They're just going to be sold as legs, and then you have to buy the head separately, especially the more expensive you get. And then you might end up thinking that you're going to buy the whole thing, and then you spend $500 on just the tripod legs, and now you have to spend another $200 to $300 to get the fluid head that attaches to it. Well, this is a ball head, but the fluid head that you would use to attach to it, you might need to spend extra to get that, and then so that's something you don't want to do unless you want to be aware of it at least, so that you can factor that into the price, and just make sure that you know what you're getting when you buy something. When you buy a tripod, are you getting the head with it? And even if you get the head with it, you might end up wanting to buy a different head. And a lot of tripods will, well, almost all of them will allow you to switch out the head. So having good sturdy legs is also good, just because you might not like the kind of head it has. You might want to get a different one that's more smooth or just has better functions for your needs. And you can still use your tripod legs. You just attach the new head that you buy. So you don't have to buy a whole new tripod. You can just buy it in pieces like that. So it's also something to consider. The next thing, of course, you want to look at is the build quality and the materials that the tripod is made out of. Because if it's made out of a bunch of plastic and really thin, cheap metal, it might bend, it might break, it will get knocked over easier, it might fall in the wind, compared to if it's a heavier, more sturdy, either metal or carbon fiber, it will be a bit more sturdy and work a bit better and be more durable. You also want to think about the camera and lens combo that you're most likely going to be using when you're selecting the best tripod to fit your budget. So if you're using a DSLR that's going to have a wide angle lens, it's not going to need to be as sturdy as a tripod with it that you'll need if you have a cinema camera with a telephoto lens. So just make sure you check what's called the payload, or the carrying capacity, which can handle the weight of your combo. So some tripods will say they can handle 20 pounds, and then you just want to look and make sure that you see how much your camera weighs when it has both the lenses and the camera body itself, as well as all the attachments you might put to it, to see if it can handle that weight. 20 pounds, usually it's going to handle most things, but some cameras and things like that, you're going to need to buy the fluid heads and the tripods that can handle 30 pounds, 40 pounds or more, depending on how crazy big your camera is. So it's something to consider and to look into, and just to kind of be aware that you don't just want to buy one and if you don't really know what kind of camera and lens you're going to be using, you kind of want to weight on the tripod until after you at least know what you want to get. So you can know the weight that you're generally going to go towards. This one is from Gemini Connect. This is letter C. You guys want to look at that. 6 features to look for in a good tripod. It's a video. And one of the things they mentioned is that some tripods allow you to remove the rubber parts at the bottom or the feet and have either already have a spike in place or have an attachable spike, like these little metal parts you see at the bottom of the picture. And that's good because it allows you to put the tripod on flat surfaces without scratching the ground with the little rubber parts. Or if you're outside and you're in a yard or you're at the park, like I said earlier, you could have little spikes that kind of dig into the ground a bit so that there's a bit more of a sturdy stability there instead of just having those rubber parts that might slide across, especially depending on what kind of weather conditions are outside. So those little metal parts can come in handy when you're needing to get a little more stability in different terrain than you would get on a flat, even surface. And those rubber parts are really good when you don't want to scratch the floor or cause any damage. So you want to make sure that those are capable of doing that. Some of them also have like these little screws, like where it stays extended, like the bottom right part stays like that for the most part, where it is that flat rubber part. But then you can just kind of screw it down in to get the little spike to appear. So it doesn't necessarily have to be interchangeable or have it underneath. It can just be something where you can screw it. But not every tripod does this. Some of them just have the flat parts. Some of them just have the spikes. So you just want to look into it. I would say the majority have just the flat parts compared to the spikes, but a lot of them can do this interchangeability thing. So it's just something to look into and consider. There's also some tripods, and a thing you might want is these little hooks that come at the bottom of the middle of the tripod. And that's where you can put things like sandbags or something else that's kind of heavy to hold down the tripod, give it more stability so that it's less likely to fall over. So just having that little hook there is a little bit better than having to wrap around the kind of like this picture right here that I'm going on. I don't want to click it because then it'll take me to the website. But instead of having to put the tripod on the legs like that, putting it just in the middle, it's a little bit easier and a little better. And it's not as bulky and it doesn't take up as much space. And it's a little easier and a little more reliable, I would say, because it's weighing down the center instead of just weighing down one leg. But that way is good too, especially if you want to weigh down all 3 legs, depending on how much the weight is at the top of your thing and how expensive your camera is. You might want to get some extra protection and extra stability there. But having that middle center hook is just a quick little easy thing that you will get that stability if you put a sandbag there right away compared to having to do it like this. Something else you might want to consider, like I said, the tripods have different amounts of sections. Some have just 2 sections, some have 1, some have 3, 4, or 5. It goes up and down depending on what tripod you're getting. The more sections it has, it means that it's going to take a little bit longer to set up because then you have to either unlatch or unscrew the different sections to extend it and then lock them in place one at a time, compared to if you just had a 2-section or 3-section one where you just do it once or twice. If you have a 5-section one, you have to do it 5 times for each leg. And so that can just add more time. And that's something, again, to consider because time is everything when you are running on a production schedule. So that's something to consider. But also the ones that have more sections can probably, when you retract it down, and the size can be a little bit more compact, most likely because it'll be the legs completely in on each other instead of having 3 bigger chunks that you have to attach to. So if travel and bringing it around places and having it be small and compact is something important, that's something you want to consider, is maybe you do want those extra sections, no matter how long it's going to take to set up. You need it because of whatever you're doing. It needs more travel and it has more, or you just don't have space in your car for all the equipment. So you need something as small as can be. So you need something that can compact down very, very small. With more sections, you're more likely to have that. Most tripods that you get when we're talking about build quality and material, the majority of them are going to either be aluminum or carbon fiber. And aluminum corrodes after long times or when left in the elements. So if you're going to a beach or something like that, your tripod has a higher chance of corroding and getting a little more ruined and rusty compared to if you had something like carbon fiber. Aluminum also gets colder in the cold. So in cold weather, it's going to get really icy cold on that metal. And it gets a lot hotter in the heat. So if it's a really sunny day and it's really hot, that metal is going to be very hot to touch. But the aluminum is also a little bit more durable and it's a lot cheaper than carbon fiber. So if you're getting a tripod, if you're buying it on Amazon or something, you'll often see that they have multiple options. One of them is aluminum and the other one is making it carbon fiber. And the carbon fiber can oftentimes be double the price. So depending on how much you think you're going to need that and how much you think it's worth, you might want to get the carbon fiber or the aluminum for the budget or just for the practicality of it. Aluminum is a little bit more heavy as well. So it can also be more sturdy at times than carbon fiber because the less weight there is, the more chance it has to get blown over and things like that. I mean, it's not super likely, especially not on the more heavy duty tripods, but anything that does take away some of that weight will affect the overall stability by some amount. So it's just something to take into account and to consider, but it's not anything that's going to like make or break it. Unless you're going super cheap end, which you probably aren't even going to get aluminum or carbon fiber in those instances. If you're buying like those $25 ones, you're probably getting some kind of really thin, cheap metal that might not even be aluminum, or you're getting plastic. And so those are things to look out for, because the really cheap ones they can break really easily. Actually, Parker Walbeck showed that in his video. He just he hit his knee against it on purpose. He put it to the side and like actually bashed it into his knee, but he showed that it got bent really quickly. And so he showed how cheap the material actually is. So if you accidentally hit it against a wall or something, it might bend and get off of balance. And then you can never really set it up to level it out correctly because that one leg might always be weaker. So that's why you kind of might want to go with a higher budget tripod because it's going to be important to your production. And you don't, again, like Vish said, you don't want to have a really expensive camera on a really cheap tripod because it's more likely that it's going to fall over and it's more likely that you're going to break that camera. You want to have something that can handle that weight. You want something that can handle the camera moves and this, stability of it all. So it's not going to, you can get those really smooth movements instead of like something that's cheap, which might be a little more jaggy looking and jaggedy or just like, I don't know, not as smooth. Anyone have any questions about tripods? Comments or anything to add that I didn't add?
Yeah. So, you described the different types of tripods. And just know that there is no perfect tripod. Not saying that you have to go out and buy as many as you can, but if you were to ask me, for me, like I have a rounded ball head tripod, and then there are times where it's nice to have a ball head tripod, but there are times where I wish I just had a flat, because what you were mentioning about the quick release plates, it's kind of rare that you see, like, I find myself going back, unless you're using all Manfrotto tripod heads. But a lot of times when you get different pieces of equipment, like a jib or something like that, that's kind of like a hard thing to do. So like my jib doesn't have a Manfrotto quick release tripod head plate or anything like that. So like whenever I have to go on a jib, I still have to change the plates out regardless if it's a Manfrotto or not. I still have to go and change it. So, but there is the option, like if I had a flat-ended tripod head, I wouldn't even have to worry about it. I can just put my tripod head on top of that. So I had to get a separate mounting plate for my jib. So there are times like if I want to go, if I want to use a slider or something like that, the tripod, you're gonna need a flat end tripod for other pieces of equipment. Was what I'm trying to get at. And then my actual tripod is a rounded. So I have a Magnus tripod head on my tripod, but then everything else I have for every other piece of equipment is like a flat backed tripod, which is annoying because it's like, oh, now I gotta change the tripod or tripod head or whatever. So, you would think that the ball head tripod head would be the way to go, but it's not. Like I said, you're not gonna find the perfect tripod, because I have a ball head tripod, and there are times where I wish I didn't have a flat. But I know if I did have a flat tripod, I'm going to be hurting, because like, oh man, anytime I use somebody else's equipment and they don't have a flat, they don't have a ball head tripod, I'm like, oh God, because now I can't, as you mentioned, level out, the shot. I have to go adjust the legs, and that gets kind of annoying in itself too. So, and then they try to make tripods that try to do everything and become more versatile. Like this tripod here you have on screen, that one of those, they kind of make the one you just had with the beanbag.
I feel like the whole point of tripods is like not only to hold the thing up, but also like to not take up too much. Like it's supposed to be somewhat portable as well, right? Or somewhat easy to maneuver. So
not necessarily. It depends on what it's used for. Some of them are for studio use, which are going to be, they're not going to care as much about space. They're not going to care about compactability, because they're meant for those situations where you're basically just setting it up and you're leaving it in.
Fair. But what I mean is, that's fair. That's right. I just mean that like I can imagine it would be hard to find an all-in-one, because like you said, some are going to stay put, some are not, some are going to need to be moved around more. So I guess the ones that stay put have the ability, and I guess the advantage of being able to have more, because it's heavier, but it also has more stuff and it can handle more of a weight because it's bulkier. Because it's bulkier, as opposed to one that's less bulky because it needs to be able to be moved around. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so you usually, like, I think that's what Brian was getting to. I don't know, maybe not, but
Brian.
Like, it depends on a lot of people, especially when they start filming a bunch, they want to have these, they want to have different tripods, one for maybe more for travel and for like if they have to fly to somewhere to shoot, and some more for like those local or studio settings where the space doesn't matter. It's all about stability, and the movement of the tripod itself with the pans and tilts, and maybe even rolls.
Yeah.
But here's what Brian was talking about with the ball head. It looks like this. There's a ball.
No, that's a type of it. The one you just had actually was the, go back to it. That one right there. So you see the bottom. You see how where it connects to the legs. See how it's rounded out.
Oh yeah.
So you could actually loosen the bottom of it, and you could actually because it's like the legs, the connection of the legs is like a cup, and then the bottom of it is like a sphere. So you put it in there, and it's like, you know, you could level it, you can tilt it in different ways. A flat one, you wouldn't be able to do that. You would just have to adjust the actual legs to get it level.
Something like that.
Yeah, something like that. It's just straight flat. So
Right.
you wouldn't be able to make like adjustments and stuff like that. Well, you know, you would have to adjust the legs to get it level. And it can get kind of tricky at times because, like, I don't know, sometimes it's just you're going back and forth, you're having to redo the legs and all that stuff. It gets annoying.
Right. Okay, cool. All right. So whenever you're talking about it, you're meaning like the place where it actually attaches to the legs of the tripod, whether it's
Yes.
like the ball or whether it's the flat.
Yeah, because as you had mentioned, the more higher end tripods come with like legs, because you know a lot of people get so adjusted to the head, and they're like, man, I really love this head, but these legs aren't sturdy enough, or I broke my tripod leg, so you just have to buy another set of legs, you know.
Right.
Or maybe I want a carbon fiber legs to kind of like lighten up the load when they travel around.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Cool. Okay. So yeah, that's something else to look out for, guys, whenever you're looking at the heads.
But basically, what do you mean? Like, there is a such thing as a perfect tripod because different tripods are used for different things.
Well, even then, it's also about the heads as well. Like you was just saying, this one that's more like a ball, it's easier to level it out because that part can actually allow you to readjust the angle that it's at without it being an actual like ball head itself, where these ones are more used for photography. They're easy to set up, but they, the actual ball that's in that upper part, the movement isn't easy to repeat, and it's harder to get good fluid pans and tilts out of these kinds of heads compared to something like this or this, where they're specifically made for smooth movement of tilts and pans, and they're easily repeatable because you can keep it at the same level and just do that pan or that tilt over and over again. But depending on that piece that attaches to the legs itself, some of them will be more compatible than others. The flat one will probably go with a lot more equipment than the round ones, but depending on what you get, all the equipment you get, you just want to look into that, because you might get equipment, all of your equipment might line up with this kind of attachment compared to a flathead. It just depends on what you're spending and what kind of equipment you're getting. But typically speaking, these ones that aren't flat are easier to level out. Then you don't have to do the mess with the legs and all that, like Brian was talking about, because that does take extra time. If this little leveler, if you can see it at the bottom left, it has that little leveler, but it's that flat section at the bottom that's going to attach to the legs. Well, if that leveler is off, I have to mess with the actual legs of the tripod. I have to bend down and unattach them and lower it just a bit, one leg at a time, and kind of see, okay, and then go back up to the bubble leveler and see if it's in the center again. And if it's not, go back to the legs and retry and redo it. So it's a lot easier to level out a shot when you're using something more like this, where you can quickly and easily look at the leveler while you're adjusting it and just accurately get it centered really quickly, compared to like a trial and error that you might need to do with something a little more like this. But so that's something to look out for. But also, like Brian was saying, this kind of equipment, the flat ones, they're generally going to be more compatible with other pieces of equipment, so you can quickly move them between different the quick release plates. You can quickly take out that quick release plate and move it between different pieces of equipment.
Okay.
Next is monopods, and monopods are very similar to tripods in their functionality and like the different things to look out for when buying one. But they only have that one leg. Some of them, like this one on screen, has these little tiny extenders that go out that kind of make it act as a tripod to make it a little more stable and maybe able to be left alone. But A lot of monopods are just these handheld ones where kind of like this, it just has one leg, it has one part where you hold it at. And basically these are used instead of tripods. Sometimes these will be used for quickly being able to maneuver and go around in a space while still having some stability by putting it on its leg and having a tiny bit of like hand motion in the shot while also having it be pretty stable. But if you have a monopod like this, you just have to keep a hold of it the whole time, because if you let it go, it's just going to fall over. Whereas if you have a monopod sort of like this, you might be able to leave it alone. I've seen some people do it. I'd be afraid to do it if I had a camera, especially how expensive it is. But you know, these do make it able, these little extenders at the bottom make it able to stand on its own without needing you to constantly hold it like something like this would. The monopods are typically lighter weight and they're more versatile than tripods. They allow you to quickly set up, break down, move, and reset up. They aren't as stable and they can't handle as much weight as tripods for the most part, but they are used for the stability and versatility. Monopods are also a bit more inconspicuous. So if you were going to, we don't condone this, but if you were going to do guerrilla filmmaking, then a monopod might be a better choice because you are able to quickly take it, set it up, and it's just kind of a long stick instead of a huge three-legged thing that you're putting all over the place to set up the shot, which is just a little more, you know, noticeable than a quick monopod, which you're just carrying it. And you can kind of break down the monopod to make it just look like it's a handheld gimbal or something, or like a glide cam or something like that when you're not using it specifically. And then you can just quickly release it and extend it to reach the ground when you're trying to get your shots. Besides that, you might just want to use one just because you are shooting something that doesn't require, that you want to have a little bit of more hand movement. You don't want it to be completely stable, but you want it to be stable enough to where it doesn't look like shaky cam, but it has a little bit of that hand movement. So it looks, you know, it just has a little bit of movement and not too much, but a lot more than you'll get from those really smooth and stable movements of a tripod where you're panning and tilting only. With a monopod, you can move the monopod itself around to make some movement, or you can also have that head on top that can do panning and tilting, but it'll just have that tiny bit of hand movement, tiny bit of movement when you're going back and forth to it to give it more of a personal feel if you want, or make it seem more like somebody's filming it, or whatever you're going for. There's different reasons you might want to use a monopod instead of a tripod and instead of like a handheld, because it just gives a little more stability than handheld. Then, but generally speaking, I would say for film and narrative content, tripods are generally the go-to choice. And then it's like tripods, stabilizers, shoulder mounts, things like that for a little more stability with handheld compared to monopods. Monopods are, in my opinion, and from what I've seen, they're more used in things like live events, concerts, weddings, things like that, so that the videographer can quickly go from one spot to another and get some stability in their shots and get those quick movements and just really quickly set up, and because they can't miss those live moments, compared to in a film or narrative context where you can usually take more time with it to set up the shot, and you usually want it to be a little bit more stable depending on what you're shooting. But that's not to say that it's not used in filmmaking, because they are, and I've seen it. It's just not as common. And the rest of the options with monopods are just very similar to tripods. Like with the rubber feet or the spiked feet, you can see this guy, he has a rubber foot This girl is using a spiked foot to put it into the grass to get a bit more stability. And then they have like, they can have those levelers, the little bubble thing. They can extend and has that certain amount of weight that it can allow for the head, and have those different kinds of heads that can attach to it. And if you want a fluid head with it, you can do that. If you want a ball head, you can do that. You know, those different head types you can put onto it, or different ones come with different types of heads already. And then they'll have those twist or clamp latches like you saw in the tripods, and how many sections it has will also be dependent, basically the same. Like this one has about 1, 2, 3, 4 sections with 3 latches. So you can see that one might take a tiny bit longer to set up than this one that might just have like 2 sections. But pretty much the things you look out for in a monopod are the same as a tripod. It's just they're more maneuverable. They're a lot lighter. They are a lot easier to break down too. So if you are traveling a lot, if you are flying across places and you want some just really quick shots of things, and you don't want too much camera stability, like you don't want it to be completely stable and set off, then a monopod might be a good choice, because you can really like take them apart, break them down piece by piece, and fit them in a camera bag really easily, compared to maybe a tripod that is a bit more bulky and you can't break it down as far for the most part as you can with a monopod. Does anyone have any questions or comments or anything to add on that? Brian, do you use monopods?
I've used them before. I don't favor them at all.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the idea of it seems kind of like, something that's ideal, I guess, because you're leveling it out, but you're only using one solid leg, and it seems like it's very transportable and whatnot. But I don't know, just using it, you feel very tempted to like lean forward and try camera movements that it's really not intended to do, and it's not so great for panning and tilting and all that good stuff. It's just meant for sitting there. But
right,
you get tempted to like, I don't know, you just feel so, I don't know, for some reason you just feel so trapped with it for some reason. I don't know how to explain it, but I've used it before. But
I know, I understand that, because like I've used one before, and it's like because like with the one I had, it's like this one and on screen where you have to hold it, and so it's really hard to not like, you can't leave with the spot. You have to hold it there, or you have to bring it with you, and then you lose that shot setup. So there is that huge con to it, I think, because with the tripod you can just leave it there, walk over to somebody and hey, blah, 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 and go over back to it. But with a monopod, you have to like, you come to me. So I can't leave this spot.
It's great for photographers or ones that are like constantly getting action. But like the thing that the other downside to that too is, if you've done photography before, a lot of their stuff is reliant on shutter speed. If they're ever using tripods, they'll never be able to get a shot with it because it's not steady. It's not on an actual tripod. It's like, there's still some kind of slight movement there that might throw off a shot.
Right.
So there's negatives to both film and photography. And as far as film goes, like, it's still not ideal for like the more professional side of it. That's the thing about the DSLR cross rip, is just like, the DSLRs came out, and then they came out with all these third-party products, and then then they decided to revert back to the cinema cameras, which are a little bit, some of them are the same size, but a lot of them are bigger now. It seems like we went really small, and then now all of a sudden cameras are getting bigger for no reason. So see these monopods, like, I'm not going to put, not even the Black Magic. I shoot Black Magic, and the camera itself is the size, it's a little bit bigger than a traditional DSLR. But like, once you rig it up and put all the battery and stuff on there, it's like pretty big and pretty heavy. So like, the monopods, I don't even really consider those anymore. So
right. Cool. Okay. Thanks for the input. And yeah, I kind of agree, but I figured I'd point it out since I know people use them and some people like them so a lot, but
Yeah.
But yeah, I typically stay more towards tripods, but it just depends on what you're trying to do really with your shots, with the feeling of that scene and how quickly you need to move around, and if it's traveling a bunch and things like that. Moving on from, actually not moving on from some of the brands that you'll find for monopods or tripods: Manfrotto, I think it's Manfrotto, Gitzo, Really Right Stuff, Enduro, Three-Legged Thing, Vanguard, I think it's Feisel, Oben, and Newer. There's other brands out there, but those are the ones that are typically rated some of the better ones. I'm sure if you get to the way more expensive things that the majority of people don't buy, then they're going to be better and they're not going to be in this list. And the cheaper you go, they're going to be maybe some things that aren't on this list as well. That might work all right. But these are the ones that are rated some of the best for like a medium budget, I guess, for a tripod. Some of them are actually kind of expensive, but yeah, those are some of the brands you might find if you're looking into tripods, and some of the ones you might be able to trust. Lastly, we're going to talk about Proxies just a little bit more than we did last time. We have already talked about this a few times now, so I'm just going to quickly go over. Proxies is just basically a lower resolution version of the footage that you have when you're editing, so that your computer can run the edit a lot faster. If you're editing RAW or if you're editing 4K or 6K footage, your computer's going to be a lot harder to handle it, as well as interframe footage if it's at a high quality and a high bit rate, and you want to have a proxy that's an intra-frame codec that can really make the editing process a lot smoother and faster. So when you're talking about Premiere Pro, when you are creating a new project, you have the project settings, and you have these three tabs at the top: general, scratch disk, and ingest settings. If you want to make some proxies, you go to that ingest settings, click on ingest, and then click, instead of pressing copy, you're going to go down and do create proxies. And that will create these lower resolution files. You'll be able to choose what kind you want, what the codec exactly is. Like you can choose ProRes, but then there's different versions of ProRes that are a little bit higher resolution and lower resolution. So you can choose what you need for what your computer can handle. And then it's going to create these proxies. One of the downsides about it with proxies in general is it is going to take a bit of time for the software to transcode your footage and make a lower resolution version that you can use. But during the editing process itself, it's going to tremendously speed up your computer if it's having any lag or any buffering because of the content that you're trying to edit and how high quality and how big it is, and how much space it's taking up, and how much your computer needs to process to get you to show you what's on screen. So you'll use proxies, and you just create one that best fits your computer's capabilities and what it can handle. So then you can handle editing 6K footage on a laptop, because you're going to be editing it through a proxy, which is just going to be a very lower resolution version. And at the end, Adobe automatically, this stuff is all, by the way, this is all from Lens Pro to Go. I mean, A, B, and C. It has a 3-part little thing. It's really quick and to the point about what these are, how to use them, and some tips with working with them. So if you want to know more, I would say watch his videos. They were really quick and to the point. They're only like 3 or 4 minutes each, so not bad. But if you've already started a project, you can also create proxies for individual files or groups of files by selecting them, right-clicking them, and going down to create proxies, which will be in the actual settings in the timeline if you're clicking on the clip. That way, if one clip is messing up, if you have a lot of stuff going on in one clip, or if something is a problem with the proxy, like I've heard that if you are changing the frame rate, if you are using a 60 frame piece of footage and bringing it to 24 frames to have slow motion, then sometimes the proxy won't be able to handle it as well. And you actually don't want to work with a proxy for that clip. Then Adobe or other editing softwares allow you to just flip off that one clip and delete the proxy for that one, or create a proxy for all the rest except for that one, so that that problem doesn't happen. And that's what you can do in the actual project. But if you're doing it when you're ingesting all the footage, then it's just going to do it for every single piece of footage that you have whenever you are starting a new project. Then Premiere has a little toggle button. Let me see. By the way, I'm saying Premiere because he was going over Premiere because that's what they use. But a lot of editors, like I know DaVinci, also use and are capable of using all these same functions with proxies. They're going to be in different places for each one. So you just have to like look up where it is on the editor you're using if you have proxies. Not every single editor does have proxies though. So you want to look into that. If you're buying a new editing software, you want to kind of see like, does it allow proxies and how functional are they? Because they do speed up the process if you are going to be working on a lot of higher resolution footage, and especially for longer projects when you have huge amounts of stuff to look through, you want to have that speed. But anyway, Adobe Premiere has this little button that you can click a little plus button, and right under your clip, it's going to have like the different things you can do, like play the video, go back, set an in point, out point, all that stuff. If you press the little plus button that it's circled at the bottom right here, it'll bring up this menu of these other little tools that you can add. And this one that they've circled and shown a little arrow pointing that way, that one is the proxy toggle button. So that one will toggle the proxy on and off. So if you are working on a piece of footage and you are trying to, it's 6K footage and you want to reframe it a bit, but you want to make sure that you don't zoom in too close to where it's going to take some of that detail away and it's going to look a little uglier than what you're expecting, you can just turn off the proxy and view it in full resolution while you're doing that one editing function. And then you can click the proxy button again to turn on the proxy so that you're seeing the lower resolution footage and you're working with that in Premiere so that it's a little bit faster to edit. But that way, if you need, for any reason, you need like the full resolution version, it's just a quick toggle of the button that lets you view the full resolution compared to the low resolution and back and forth when you're working with proxies. When exporting, Premiere and DaVinci will both automatically, by default, change the proxy footage to the full resolution. So you don't even have to really worry about having to switch off proxies at the end anymore. Back in the day, a few years ago, I think, or maybe it was more than a few years ago, they had proxies, but you had to like manually make sure to turn them off and ingest them and then take them out. But now it's just a simple click of a button that switches the whether it's proxies or not. And even then, these editing softwares now by default will export with high resolution footage. So they'll export with the source footage instead of the proxies, because they know what proxies are and why you're using them is just to speed up the edit, but not the actual footage you want to use. And so yeah, so that's something you don't even really have to worry about anymore. But if you are worried about that at all, you can just check in the system as well to see like in the settings, you can go in and you can change it to say that you want proxies to be turned off before you export if you don't trust the software itself to do it. You typically always want the proxies and the original files to be clearly named. So some cameras are going to reset the file names every time you switch a memory card. And if you switch a memory card, it'll start over and be like 0001A, 0002A, 0003A, or, you know, probably more zeros than that. But then when you switch the memory card, it's going to start over and go back to 0001A, 00, and then you're going to have duplicate names of files when they're different shots. So always be sure to, you know, this is just editing in general, not even if you're using proxies, but always be sure to name all the files before you import them into your editing software. Then when you're creating these proxies, you can easily attach them to all the footage that needs to be attached. You're not accidentally attaching anything to the wrong piece of footage because it has the same name, especially if you have to go in and find it later. You don't want to accidentally access the wrong piece of footage and potentially mess up the edit. You want to make sure it's all clearly named. It's all named in order of how it is and what it's used for and what clip it is and all that. That way it's easy to tell what is what. And the proxy should be named the same as the source file, but with like proxy in the name, you know, so it's like clip one, scene one, take one, and then scene one, take one, proxy. There you go. Then you know that proxy goes directly with scene one, take one. If anything happens, any mess ups happen, and you have to reattach that proxy to it. Most of the time, it's not really going to be a problem because the editing software you're using is just going to automatically attach those proxies, and it's going to know which one goes with which. But in, you know, sometimes things happen, and for some reason it might unattach or it might lose the link somehow. Maybe you move the file footage. I don't know. But then you might have to like reattach it. And that's when you want those naming conventions to be there so that you can attach it really quickly and easily. The next thing comes from B&H. This is D in the syllabus. And this is just that some cameras will record proxies internally while recording the original footage. So some cameras, especially newer ones and more expensive ones, actually allow for proxies to be made during the recording. The downside of proxies, both on computer and in a camera, is that it's going to take up more space because it's another file. It's just at a lower resolution. So you might have the full footage that is 100 megabytes for that clip, and you might make a lower resolution that's 30 or 40 megabytes instead. That's still an additional 30 to 40 megabytes every time you record, if you record that same length, or if you edit that same length. So that is something to consider. It's going to take up more space, but generally it doesn't take up nearly as much space, especially as like RAW or something where you're most likely going to have those options to turn on proxies while editing. The RAW footage will be taking up a huge amount of space, while the proxies will take up a significant amount less. And so you want to just check your camera, because that's the easiest way to get proxies, is to just have it recorded straight into your footage. And then you just import it into your Premiere project or your DaVinci or whatever software you're using right away. In Premiere, you can go to settings and then you go to media and you select enable proxies if that doesn't automatically turn itself on. Sometimes you can create proxies and they don't automatically turn it on in the software. So you just go into like the media and the settings to manually turn it on so that you can see those proxies, those proxy files. This next one, these next little things, I think I only have 2 things left, is from Casey Ferris, F in the syllabus. And oh, I'm already on how to make proxies, DaVinci Resolve 17. In DaVinci Resolve, it's the same for matching proxies. You can right click, go to generate proxy media. So it's just like a different naming, but it's, if you see proxies, it's the same thing. And you just do it on the clips you want. DaVinci, like Premiere, will default automatically and switch back to the full resolution version when you're exporting. And it has an option to switch between proxies and full resolution while editing. Now, I don't know about the rest of the editing softwares, but I do know that those two specifically do the same exact stuff. So picking between those two for proxies in general is going to have the same thing. It's all the same features are there. And I'm pretty sure all the other high-end, all the more well-known editing softwares allow proxies and do the same stuff because it's just pretty simple and standard at this point. Does anyone have any questions, comments, or anything to add about proxies? Yeah, so that's how to actually like make them. And when exporting, you don't even have to worry about it sometimes compared to like how you used to have to manually do it. All right, like I said, the last thing I'm going to mention is we have that new exercise for the budget. It's going to come up, and that's going to make 3 exercises due on February 28th, which is not next Monday, but the Monday after that. So the last day of February. That is the day that we are going to go over those 3 exercises, 3 of them being the editing style exercise, where we are making a editing style similar to Shawshank Redemption. A lot of their style was with the narration. I've gone over this, sent out an email about it. So if anyone has any questions, ask me about that. And then the editing sound tool exercise, where you take a short little piece of footage, a dialogue piece or something, and you adjust it with the different tools that we've looked into to hear the differences and see what they do and see how they mess with the waveform and all of that. And then we have this new one that I'll be sending out an email for tomorrow, most likely, about the budgeting exercise. And I'll be sending out the scene, and I'll be sending out some of the templates I've seen, or I'll be making my own, and I'll be sending that out to say, hey, if you guys want to use this one, I've adjusted it to how I feel it should be. Do whatever you like with it. And then when you're making that exercise, I'll just give a few tips of like, be sure that you're taking into account everything, and be sure that the whatever template you're using, the formulas are correct and that everything is going through as it should. As we saw today, some of them don't. So you want to make sure that it always does, and everything's going to be going through correctly so that you arrive at the correct total and you're not missing or adding any extra expenses that you didn't even account for. And lastly, I'm just going to say what we're going to study on Thursday. Thursday, we're going to be talking about editing softwares. So I was just talking about some of that. Maybe we'll talk more about like which ones allow you to do proxies, or if all of them do. We're going to actually look into the different ones, the main ones that are used, like Avid, Premiere, DaVinci, and Final Cut. And we're going to see the differences between them, pros and cons of each, and why you might use them, price, subscription-based versus full, buying the full program, all that stuff we're going to be talking about. And then monitors, both field monitors, and like field or camera monitors, ones that are either detached or kind of hook up to your camera or be like right on top of it or something. We're talking about like what to look for in a monitor if you're buying a new one. And we're also going to be talking about editing monitors, as in computer monitors for editing. So we're going to be talking about all the different monitors and what to look for in each of those types. And we're also going to be talking about parallel editing and cross-cutting. And that's going to be another exercise that we're not doing until later on after the 28th. We're going to watch another film based on its editing. This time it's going to be Inception, because they do parallel editing and cross-cutting very well. And they have, it's very prominent in the film. So it'll be the easiest way to demonstrate it. So we're gonna be watching Inception together, talking about it. And the last editing style exercise we're gonna do is parallel editing or cross-cutting. And we're gonna kind of see what the differences are. They're usually used interchangeably, but they do technically mean something different. And we'll discuss that Thursday. So that's everything, everybody. I'm gonna stop the recording there.